Well, good afternoon and welcome to the Community and Infrastructure Services Committee. We have quorum, so we can begin. The consent items. Move those. Any questions? Question, Councillor Gazzola? Okay. Oh, sorry. Sorry, questions on all or one?
On two or three of them.
Okay.
Quick questions. Yeah, and our first one is on the one in Ward 9, where there's a 41% respondents. What are the rules on that? That to me it seems very low, and we're making a decision based on that.
Okay, Mr. Carmichael.
Thank you. Through the chair, in response, we don't have a defined policy on minimum response rate when it comes to parking surveys, but I will comment that the 41% response rate is probably right in the average, or maybe even on the higher of the average of what we typically get for a response rate for these types of surveys. So,
okay, I thought we did have some standards. Okay.
no, our minimum response rates are limited to our traffic calming policy.
Okay, then I want to jump ahead to page 3.2, the Williamsburg Road follow-up on traffic calming. To me, it looks like the reduction in speeds by 12 to 13% is a good thing. And would you agree with that? That's all.
Through the chair, that's obviously the mandate of our traffic calming reviews, is to reduce the speeds on the roadway, and the 12 to 13% reduction is obviously considered and looked at as nothing but positive.
Yeah, that's all. I just wanted to point out that it's doing what we intended it to do.
Exactly.
So I just wanted to underline that. The last question is on the extension for the 4th Ave reconstruction. We're extending the contract that we have by about 27%. How much more work are we doing?
Through the chair, it's another 90 meters. I don't have the exact numbers, but I think it was about 20%.
Okay, so it's in line with what the
Correct.
contract's going to. Okay, thank you.
So no further questions. We move the consent items. Okay. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Okay, we're moving on to our delegations. And before that, our bylaw director, Gloria, has a 5-minute presentation.
Through the chair, I just wanted to take an opportunity to advise council what bylaw staff have been doing for the last 12 months in regards to the research on this chicken bylaw. So we have researched and engaged with the public and other municipalities who currently permit backyard chickens to determine whether backyard chickens are appropriate for residential properties within the City of Kitchener. Our engagement process has included an online survey, as well as 3 separate public meetings. And through that consultation process, we did receive feedback from residents in all 10 wards. What we've heard from residents was that majority of people who responded supported backyard chickens. Many residents who were not interested in having chickens themselves were not opposed to their neighbors having them, as long as there were rules and regulations in place to govern them. Currently, there are other cities that permit backyard chickens, including Guelph, Brampton, Kingston, Sarnia, Niagara Falls, and Cambridge is currently going through the same process that we are going through. The regulations and maximum numbers of chickens for each of those other municipalities vary. Some are more restrictive than what we're proposing, while others allow a larger number of chickens to be kept. Staff have been advised by these municipalities that they receive very little to no complaints in relation to the keeping of chickens, and that they have in fact had very little uptake from residents once the bylaw actually passes. Staff have taken the feedback provided through the consultation process, both supportive and not, and have tried to find a balance that would allow residents who are interested in chickens to keep them without impacting a neighboring property. Staff believe that we found a balance through the recommendations that we're proposing, and that several of those recommendations are a compromise of what we heard. So how did staff come up with the recommendations we're proposing? We've done a great deal of research to see what's involved with keeping and caring for chickens. We've spoken with other municipalities who currently permit the keeping of chickens, and we've reviewed their bylaws. We've discussed best practices with them. We've discussed numbers and types of complaints that they receive, and we've asked if they've had any recommendations for us moving through this process. We've engaged the public and held meetings that were collaborative and required residents to work together in group settings in order to obtain feedback and solutions. And we've spoken with a veterinarian who specializes in chickens, as well as the Humane Society and OMAFRA, who's the Ontario Ministry of Agricultural and Food and Rural Affairs, in order to ensure that our recommendations are appropriate. Some key regulations that we're proposing are maximum of 4 chickens, no roosters, no slaughtering, so hens are strictly for the purpose of fresh eggs, no sale of eggs or any other products associated with the keeping of chickens. We're recommending that we ban chickens in order to allow us to return them if they should get loose or if we need to move forward with charges. Application and registration process to allow us to know who has them and where they're located throughout the city. We are proposing a one-time fee for the application and inspection process. And we're also setting out coop construction regulations and setback requirements, as well as sanitation regulations. Staff believe that the recommendations being proposed are a fair compromise and are reflective of what we heard through the consultation process and our research. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ms. McNeil. I'm going to hold questions of staff until we've heard from all our delegations, and we'll begin hearing from our delegations right now, beginning with Janie Brenner. Janie, you're welcome to join us at the podium. Just a reminder for our delegations, you'll have 5 minutes to speak. The clock is right there. It'll assist you, and we want to make sure that you're bringing each delegation is bringing new information, not repeating information that's been already presented.
Hi, my name is Jamie Brenner, and I live in Doon, which is Ward 4, along with my husband and 2 daughters, one of which is here. They're 4 and 2.5. I have a nice house. I live in a new subdivision, and I have a big yard. I'm a middle-class family, and I have backyard chickens. Every day when my daughters get home from school and preschool, the first thing they do is run out back to collect their eggs, and every day it's just as exciting as the first day we collected our first egg. It's a great experience for them. We got chickens for a few reasons. We care about where our food comes from, we want to teach our kids responsibility, and we care about our carbon footprint. The carbon tax is here, and it's time to be progressive. Backyard chickens are sustainable, which is described as having 3 key parts: environmental stewardship, economic viability, and social responsibility. Backyard chickens meet all 3 parts. They divert food waste from our green bin program. They generate fertilizer for my garden. They provide me with nutritious eggs. They also provide pest control for my garden and are raised cruelty-free. Caring for backyard chickens isn't my only sustainable act. I have a garden, I have a clothesline, and I collect rainwater. This is me doing my part, and I gladly pay my taxes. I'd like to point out that the City of Kitchener has a community action plan on climate change called Climate Action Waterloo Region, and I quote this from the website: "We can reduce the environmental impact when we can reduce the environmental impact of the food choices we make, we unlock economic opportunities associated with a robust local food production." This is an action plan that the city has endorsed, and this action plan supports the reduction, so it supports reducing the environmental impact of our food choices. So this is backyard chickens. This is exactly that. Let's remember that commercial eggs are grown in farms that use hydro, they're trucked down the highway, that burn diesel and stored in grocery stores and fridges that don't have doors. So I realize that backyard chickens is just a small step in the whole process, but many small steps do make a difference. For example, it wasn't that long ago, only back in 2008, that a lot of cities still banned clotheslines. So let's move forward in a positive direction. I'm pointing this out because sometimes it's easy to get stuck in the status quo. Sometimes it's not easy to change, and people don't want to anger a few vocal residents. But this is our time to be progressive and to be ahead of the curve on this positive, sustainable food practice. Here's what chickens are not. They're not loud, they're not smelly, and they're not dirty. The research completed by Gloria and her team confirms that they generate very little complaints. Those who oppose it most likely will never be impacted by the effects of a resident having chickens. They probably won't live next door to one because there are a few of us. Those who oppose it are basing their positions on experiences usually related to large-scale rural chicken farms, which are not a good point of comparison, or just random stereotypes that, again, are exaggerated. And no, I don't want to live on a farm, as a bunch of the critics have suggested. I can't afford it. And I don't want to miss out on living on the good community living that I have in my neighborhood. So I'm asking you to approve this bylaw change, and I'm asking you to presume that chicken owners will be responsible, caring, and respectful owners. This is not a decision we make lightly. It's not as easy as going out and buying a dog. And on that point, a barking dog is probably way more bothersome than backyard chickens. Bylaw will continue to enforce way more dog-related complaints than they will for chickens. I don't support the inspections. However, I will comply if that's the way the city moves forward, and I'd rather see a lower registration fee. I'd also like to see an increased limit of 6 for the few who have the need, the capabilities, and the desire to care for more. But 4 is better than none. The recommendation includes a plan to review in 1 to 2 years, so if I'm wrong, you can always take it back. But please give us a chance. So my final words are this: backyard chickens are progressive, sustainable, and educational. And if you choose to ban this practice, you're voting against a sustainable food practice in the environment in favor of a few vocal residents that will most likely never be bothered. So please give us a chance and don't be afraid of chickens.
Thank you, Ms. Brenner. We do have some questions of you, so if you could just stay right there. Councillor Singh, do you have questions of the delegation or staff?
Your initiatives that you put forward that are sustainable and environmentally friendly. But I'll quickly ask you a question now that I have the opportunity. Some of the questions I'm going to ask staff is, that's fine with the limited number of residents that do have backyard chickens. And it's only our hope that everyone will be as conscientious as you are. What if that's not the case? What if the numbers increase a lot more now that it's more public in the forefront in discussion, and there's more uptake in carrying this activity, and there are more people that are not, as careful with the guidelines? What do you think would the outcome of that?
This is a question for me?
Yeah.
That's why we do have bylaws, and Gloria and her team are proposing restrictions to this. It's just like any other pet owners, and if my chickens didn't comply, then I would take steps to make them comply, and I would make sure that my neighbors are satisfied. If there were bad chicken owners out there, then I would support bylaw in recommending and enforcing the removal of those chickens.
So I wanted to confirm, you do acknowledge that if the bylaw were to be supported and approved, that there does need to be strong guidelines in enforcing good practice.
Yep.
Okay, good, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Marsh.
Thank you, Chair Schneider. So thank you, Janie, for coming in and for bringing your young chicken owner. I want to just ask you, based on your comments, you said that you feel the fee would be too high. What would you think would be an appropriate fee, considering that we would require additional staff time to go and inspect?
I would I'd like to see a lower fee without an inspection. So thinking that the lack of inspection would reduce the cost for the city. But I'd like to see it at $25 or less.
Okay. And, but otherwise you do support the recommendation. Okay. Thank you. And at the appropriate time, I'd like to move the staff motion.
Okay. Councillor Fernandez.
Thanks, Janie, for coming in and also for letting me come out and tour your chicken coop in your backyard. You're definitely a great example of what I think many chicken owners are and probably will be. My only question to you is, have you had an opportunity to see other chicken owners' sites, and how do you feel that they've been either regulated or not regulated?
I have not. Well, there's only one other chicken site that I've seen, and it was just 2 chickens, and it was a very small coop with a very small run. But otherwise, it was clean, and it was in a nice backyard, and I would say some downtown neighborhood.
Okay. So I understand your rationale for wanting to increase from 4 to 6, and that we can always reduce. But I'm going to tell you that I think 4 is a good starting point, and we can always increase as we see people become more responsible and respectful of the whole process. Would you think that was, it's turning around what your recommendation is into something a bit more, a little bit more maybe supportive of the naysayers?
Yes. Well, I feel my understanding is it's probably more difficult to add than it is to reduce later on. So if it is a problem that I could see people wanting to spend the time to explore the issue and make the reduction versus if everything's going well, people might not be willing to go through the effort to increase the rates.
Okay, fair enough. All right. Thank you very much for coming in. You did a great job.
Thank you. Councillor Gazzola.
I have a couple of simple questions. How many chickens do you have?
I have 6.
6? Yeah, and then my other question is going to be more difficult. How many eggs do you get?
I get between 4 and 6, usually.
Every day?
Every day.
Yeah, okay. I was just curious because that's we've got these restrictions. That I was going to ask you if there were some things you didn't like about it, and you have mentioned several of them. I'm just curious why you're opposed to inspections.
It's just making it more time, it's going to cost taxpayers money to do that, and I was concerned that the fees would either not cover the full effort and end up costing the taxpayers, and also that the fee makes ownership a little bit more difficult from a financial point of view.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. And Councillor Davey.
Thank you for coming in. Just a couple of questions. How long have you had chickens in your backyard?
Just since the summer.
Since the summer, okay. Have you put, my understanding is they only lay eggs for, I guess, 3 or so years. Have you put any thought towards what you would do, how you would handle the chicken situation once they no longer produce eggs?
My thinking is that I would keep them until they passed. But I could see exchanging them, finding a suitable home for them in the country at a farm. I do have some relatives that live out there, and bringing them off to the farm and exchanging them. I think in an ideal world you could stagger your flock so you have some younger ones and some older ones, so that you can always have some egg layers.
Okay, thanks again.
Okay. Thank you very much, Janie. There's no further questions. We now invite Lori Reiser to come and speak.
Thank you. I'm kind of the opposite to Jeannie in that I live downtown. I'm a professional. My husband's a business owner downtown, and I too have chickens. I have a flock of 6 that I've had for 7 years. I grew up in Guelph, which is a town that's always allowed backyard hens, so I just continued the practice over here. I've had them for 7 years, so I can definitely answer questions about end of life. My chickens are still laying eggs because I don't light them in the winter, so they live a natural life life. They rest in the winter and they start laying eggs again in April or March. And my oldest chicken's 7 years old and I get an egg every day. But what I wanted to talk about very briefly, because Jeannie covered a lot of the big issues, was education, the importance of education. By allowing flocks, and I know that there's 3 in my neighborhood, and I know that there's probably more than that in Ward 10, because I think that's a lot of the interest is from people who live in the downtown, although not exclusively, is that by being able to come out of the woodwork and do things like hen tours, do things like the Hillside Festival has a keeping of backyard chicken seminar every year, it allows people to do this right, to be good neighbors. And I think that's a very important component. I know that as an experienced hen owner, I would love to have people be able to openly invite people to my home, show them my setup, and most importantly, make sure they know the commitment that they're getting into, because just as everyone thinks puppies and kittens are cute, not everyone is ready to take a dog on for the next 10, 12 years of their life. And chickens should be the same way. So I would like to be able to have a Kitchener hen owners group that we can then support people in doing this right, support people in setting up their coop, their run, their system in a way that is very neighborly, that does not cause issues. I live next door to a 3-story apartment building predominantly with elderly neighbors, and they come over with their kitchen scraps. They bring their grandchildren over to see the chickens. Neighbors walking down the street regularly look over my fence and say, "Are those chickens? Can I come see?" And in they come, and it's kind of an open secret in our neighborhood, to be honest with you. The other component is, of course, you do want to be a good neighbor. My neighbor was concerned. She has a dog that is very barky, and she was concerned that seeing hens permanently in the backyard was going to be bark, 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 bark. And we were concerned about that too. And we made a deal that if that was the case, off they would go. And we set up our run so that it was facing the opposite way, that the dog didn't have an easy line of sight. And in fact, the dog, it doesn't bother the dog at all. Again, 7 years with that dog, 7 years with that neighbor. We haven't had any issues. The neighborhood loves us. We've seen other flocks. You know, again, I don't think it's going to be crazy. I live in a downtown neighborhood where this is kind of a thing that people have, and I know of 3. So I think that this is an issue, just like we allow people to have fires, we allow people to have dogs, we allow people to have clotheslines. I think this is an issue where a little bit of live and let live and be a good neighbor is really what's required. I don't think we need to over-regulate this. I regret telling Gloria that when I went from 4 to 6 chickens, it was more work, because I think that influenced the recommendation. I too think 6 is a good limit, a good max. But I have 2 chickens that are 7, and I expect I'll be down to 4 soon enough. So if you have any questions, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Lori. We do have a question, a couple of questions. Councillor Gazzola.
Yeah, I have perhaps what's a stupid question, but is it not possible to eat chickens?
It absolutely is, and I can tell you very quickly about my flock. My flock consists of 3 chickens that I've had since the beginning, and 3 chickens. I had a friend who lived out in New Hamburg where they also are not permitted to have chickens. They were caught by bylaw, and they typically would eat their chickens at the end of every fall. So they had a farmer friend who they would take the chickens out to, and they would process their chickens. The other thing I forgot to mention is if that's not something that's palatable, I'm vegetarian, so that's not palatable to me. But if it's not something that's palatable, there are 2 organizations in Ontario. One's called Backyard Bok Box, and I can't remember the other, where you can actually, they give you chickens at the start of the year. They're farmers. They'll give you chickens at the start of the year. They give you everything you need for your chickens, and then at the end of the fall, they take the chickens back. And then next year you would get a new set of young chickens. So for people who don't want to winter their chickens when they're not laying eggs, and for people who would like to have young laying hens the whole time, there are options. Pullets Plus in New Hamburg, St. Jacobs, also takes hens back at the end of the year if that's what you choose to do.
Yeah, I grew up in a small town, 7,000 or 8,000 people, and we always had 35 chickens. We had bigger yards in a small town.
Absolutely.
But we ate chicken all the time, too often.
My chickens come when they're called and they know their names. So
another question I have: would you be opposed to having your property inspected randomly every now and then?
The way they're doing it in Guelph, I think, is problemsome in that bylaw officers, there's been stories of bylaw officers, standing on tiptoes, looking over fences and things like that, as opposed to, we're coming in the next week, can we make an appointment on Thursday at 2 o'clock type of thing. I think, that's just a privacy thing. I think if I had a barking dog, I'm not sure what limits there are that way, but no, I'm not opposed to. I'm confident in the coop and run setup that I have, that it would pass inspection, and it's set up in the right part of the yard. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Right. Thank you. Councillor Etherington.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for coming in. You mentioned food scraps that were brought over for your chickens. Have you ever had problems with vermin, mice, rats?
No, I was set up right from the beginning where my coop, the chicken wire runs underneath the run as well as, the walls and the ceiling. So I'm completely covered. I've never seen a raccoon. I've never seen a mouse in my yard. I use one of the black composters. So anything that I'm cleaning out of the coop is going into my black covered compost. I've never seen anything in my yard. I have 2 dogs. The only thing I see in my yard is rabbits. But I also don't put the scraps into my coop and leave it there to eat. I'll bring it out in small quantities. They essentially eat it at the time because I think if you left, a week's worth of kitchen scraps, you would attract things, and that's not the right way to do it.
Thank you. Yeah, I asked the question because I know there's been concern in various parts of the city, particularly this past 7, with an increase in mostly rats. You've never had...
I've never had a rat. All I see in my backyard are squirrels and rabbits, and they mostly go after my walnut tree.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Fernandez.
Thanks, Laurie. Thanks for your comments, and I really appreciate you talking about the options too. I think that's really important for people to understand that if they want to just chicken over the summer or the good weather, that they have options, and I think that may help put some other people's concerns aside. That's really important. You said that you've got neighbors in the apartment building that come to see you. You've got that example of the dog and the chicken in harmony is also really important for us to understand, because as a past dog owner myself, I see the population of dogs increasing almost exponentially. I guess the one question I have is have you ever had your chickens be ill? And I'm assuming you have children. Maybe I shouldn't assume. And have you had that concern about sort of cross-contamination, which is another issue that we've been hearing?
For sure. I've definitely heard about the biosecurity is definitely an issue. And so there are lots of good online resources. And for example, when I'm cleaning my coop, I have a set of rubber boots, a set of Wellingtons that, the Wellingtons and the gloves, that's what I wear when I clean my coop. Those don't come in the house. So there's my food is contained in a lock and locked container. So again, there's no chance of vermin or anybody getting into my container. And as far as illness, I've had one. I have had 2 chickens that have passed over the 7 years, and they've passed of natural causes. We haven't had any issue. They were my oldest chickens. And I have had one that's had an illness, and we just go to the vet. They had a bumblefoot, they had a little infection, and got some antibiotic, and 3 days later they were okay.
Okay, thank you for that information. I think that's very important for people who are considering this to understand that there are implications.
Absolutely, like any other pet, it's a 10-year. It could be a 10-year commitment, could be a 5-year commitment, but it's a commitment. It's a commitment to a living thing, and you have to take that seriously.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much.
And Councillor Marsh.
Thank you, Chair Schneider. Thanks, Laurie, for coming in and for your interest in this issue. So, are you offering that should this motion pass that you would want to be a mentor for hen keepers that
yeah, absolutely. I think Elaine's going to speak a little bit about the group that's been created, but I think there's absolutely I had a chance to see the Waterloo Hen Tour before I started my hens in Kitchener, and it was a huge help to be able to see what went right, what went wrong. And certainly I've known people who in their first year of hen keeping have would have benefited from being able to openly ask questions and so on. So yeah, absolutely. Okay. I'd love to be a mentor. It's kind of
Okay, thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, Laurie. There's no further questions. Thank you so much for coming in. We now call on Heidi Wall. Welcome, Heidi.
Thanks. It's great to be here. It's nice to see you all. I just have to say this is my first time being involved with the city in any kind of capacity like this, and I've been really impressed with the process. I don't currently have chickens, but I did keep chickens for several years while I was living at my parents' house, and I have since moved into my own home in Kitchener, near St. Mary's Hospital. And if this passes, I plan to get chickens and follow all the bylaws. And I just want to say I'm very much in favor of this proposal. I think it would benefit from two small tweaks. One of them being the number of chickens. Although I think the limit of 4 makes sense in a lot of ways, it might benefit more people if the number of chickens that were permitted corresponded to the number of people living in the home, and also corresponded to the size of the coop that could be permitted given the size of the backyard. The second way I think the proposal could be improved upon would have to do with the setback regulations. My backyard is very long, but it is also about as narrow as my house. I would be excluded from having chickens, and I think a very simple solution to this would be that if a person was not permitted to have chickens according to the proposed regulations, that if they talked to their neighbors and it made sense and both sides were okay with it, then that would be a really great exception to the bylaw rules. That's all I have to say.
Okay. And, we do have a question. Councillor Fernandez.
Hi, thanks, Heidi, for coming in. In a way, you were the starter of some of all of this, and I'm glad to see where it's gone. So you make a very interesting point, because I think there are going to be some situations where backyards may not be able to comply with our restrictions. And although I agree it would be lovely if you could have both neighbors on both sides or behind you support you having a chicken or some chickens in a chicken coop, neighbors ebb and flow. Mm-hmm. Today's neighbor may not be as happy as the next neighbor in a couple of years. Do you see any other way of getting around this? Is there other suggestions you have? Maybe combining together with other neighbors? I don't know. I'm just throwing out a bunch of ideas. I'd be curious to know if you have thought that further.
Yeah. I think, say, if we had a new neighbor move in, a very reasonable expectation would be that if they did not agree to having the chickens, that the chickens have to go. I think that makes sense.
Okay.
So.
Right, that's pretty drastic for the chicken owner, but okay, I can appreciate you saying that. That's fair enough.
That's my opinion.
Yeah,
so.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Etherington.
Heidi, just one comment. If I suspect you're in my ward, if you are, and you have difficulty with this narrow lot and chickens, just give me a call and I'll see what I can do. What do you do, or what have you done in the past with extra eggs?
Oh, I have never had extra eggs. When I had chickens, I discovered many excellent recipes for using up eggs, omelets, quiche, and baking, and I eat a lot of protein, like mostly meat and eggs. That's mostly what I eat. I don't eat very many vegetables.
Don't eat chicken, huh?
Pardon?
You don't eat chicken.
I do eat chicken, and I have eaten my chickens.
You have?
Yes. And I'm comfortable with that. I know that some people aren't, and I am, so I do eat them.
How did they taste?
They don't taste great. You need to put them in soup and have lots of salt.
Thank you.
Councillor Gazzola.
I want to ask you the same question. What is your opinion of random inspections?
In my opinion, transparency is the best policy. So if the city found it prudent to do that kind of inspection, I would be comfortable with it. And that's, again, just my opinion.
That's a good answer.
Pardon?
That's a good answer.
Okay, good.
Thank you, Ms. Wall.
Okay.
Next, we have Elaine Kleeser. And I should point out that we do have a petition that has been submitted, so if anyone would like to see this, I can circulate that. Welcome, Elaine.
Okay. Good afternoon. I would like to start by thanking you for the opportunity to be here today. My name is Elaine. I'm a wife, a mother of 5 children, and full-time legal assistant. In what little free time I do have, I volunteer at local theaters, and I'm on the board at KW Synchro. And I also work with chickens. My husband and I have always known the importance of caring for the environment. We recycle, we compost, we do our best to conserve energy. We have a garden, and we make our own jams and preserves. Getting hens seemed to be a natural extension for us. We knew several people with hens. We did our research over a period of several months. And in May of 2015, we brought our hens home. Our children have helped to raise them and care for them, just as they helped to plant, weed, and harvest the garden. This process has taught us so much, and it's given us a new respect for our food. It has also taught us that hens are not just farm animals. They're unique individuals, each with their own personality, their own food preferences, and their preferences about how they are handled. Bylaw has given you the results from the survey. An overwhelming 87.9% were in favor of allowing urban hens. Let me add to that our results. In July of 2015, I started an online petition through change.org, and you have the results there. 1,465 signatures from all over the world, of which 781 are from Kitchener. For a short time, we also had a paper version of the petition available at 2 local businesses. With these, we collected another 47 signatures. Heidi and I also started an online Facebook group, Kitchener Urban Hens. Currently, we have 275 members. The Kitchener Hen Association also has a presence on both Facebook and in Yahoo groups. Their Facebook group has an additional 82 members, while the Yahoo group has 57 members. Our hope is that should City Council find in favor of these amendments, our group can move forward and change its focus to better educating both urban hen owners and the public. We were hoping to arrange coop tours, publications, and do talks. This education has already started through these groups in a small way. It's also happening, perhaps unknowingly, through the City of Kitchener's help. KCI's Green Industries program, which was started 10 years ago by the teacher Patrick Rittinger, was recently named the 3rd most green school in the country by Canada's Green Building Council and the Canadian Coalition for Green Schools. This program, which has students tending to the school's community garden, harvesting rainwater, and caring for hens, was started with the help of a $225,000 grant through the City of Kitchener. In conclusion, Kitchener has long been on the cutting edge of environmentalism. The blue box was born here. We embraced the green box. Please consider allowing us to follow in the footsteps of such forward-thinking communities as Vancouver, New York, and Kingston. Please move forward in accepting the amendments as laid out by Bylaw Department. That's everything.
Great. Thank you, Elaine. We have questions for you. Councillor Etherington.
Other than chickens, do you have other pets?
We have a dog, and we have a fish.
I'm sorry?
We have 1 dog and 1 fish.
Oh.
5 kids is enough.
Do you have problems between the dog and the chickens?
No, never. When we first got the chickens, our dog is now 8. It's a Bichon Frise, so it's a little dog. When we first got the chickens, he was a little unsure of himself because in many cases the chickens were roughly the same size as him. Now they coexist peacefully. They have no issue. I mean, at the start, he would kind of look at them and run because he wasn't sure. But other than that, he never really barked at them. He was more scared of them than anything else because they were the same size and he didn't know what they were.
Yeah. And the same question I asked before. Have you ever had problems with mice, rats?
Never.
Never?
Never. I mean, we have had mice on our property. The mice were there when we moved in. Long before there were ever any chickens on our property. Our next door neighbor has a cat that roams, and we would periodically find dead mice on our property. But realistically, since the chickens appeared, I think we have fewer mice than we had before. We have like Laurie, we have lots of rabbits, we have lots of squirrels, but nothing new since the chickens appeared.
Thank you.
And Councillor Davey.
Thank you. Just one question, something I hadn't considered a whole lot, is there's been some talk about the carbon footprint and the environmental aspects of this. I can assume the obvious items like packaging. There's no packaging, obviously, in terms of purchasing chicken and transportation. Is there anything else other than that I'm missing?
What, like packaging?
Yeah, I'm just trying to
eggs.
see, like, why is it so much more environmentally friendly to have chickens in your backyard
Because
than
you're
purchasing them?
well, transportation is a big thing. Because right now, I mean, it's both environmentalism and it's just the creatures themselves. Because hens in factory farms are in battery cages. The stench from those, because you've got thousands and thousands of hens crammed into this small place, into this barn, which is never, unfortunately, it's not clean purely because they don't have the ability to clean from that many. So you get the smell of it, you get the chemicals from their feces, and then you've got the cost of the transportation, bringing them into the stores, and you've also got the waste, because unfortunately in our society, a lot of people will not buy things unless they look a certain way. My mother is a perfect example. I tried giving her free eggs. She won't take them because they don't look the way they should. They're the wrong color, they're the wrong size, and a lot of people think like that. There are a lot of eggs that unfortunately go into the waste because they just don't look right. So you've got the cost of the transportation, the cost of the cleanup at the factories. There's all kinds of different parameters there. And when you have chickens in your backyard, I mean, we have a family of 7. We have 4 hens. Like the others, I would love to see a limit of 6 because that would allow us to retire hens out and bring new ones in. But for us, 4 hens feeds our family comfortably, and there's fresh eggs out there every morning. We don't have to worry about going to the grocery store to buy them. We don't have to worry about the packaging, putting into recycling. There's always eggs there. There's always something to eat. If I have no groceries in the fridge, I can make scrambled eggs, no problem. Hard-boiled eggs. It's more convenient, and it's better for the environment.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elaine. There's no more questions for you. We now call Greg Mikolenko. Greg.
Hello, I hadn't expected to be able to be here this afternoon, but our health system's too good. I was to drive my wife to Mississauga for a specialist appointment. We got there 3/4 of an hour early because the traffic was so light on the 401. She was looked at immediately and sent home saying she didn't need the little bit of surgery, and so I'm here.
Welcome.
Thank you. I'd like to caution against being too afraid of complaints all the time. I think what we see here is we have a number of people who are very sensitive to their neighbors, to their friends, to their chickens, to their city, and they figure things out. It's sort of a self-organizing system. They already have a hen association, even though we can't raise hens in Kitchener. Well, that's pretty good. So they've made a good first step to get ahead of things. Also, I live in an old home in downtown Waterloo, and there had been chickens raised there in the past. They put the coop right in the back corner, close to the fence. They had a pen around it. That seemed to be the place that's most agreeable to people. So in reference to the concern that somebody had a yard, but it would be too narrow under the setbacks that have been set, I would suggest that that needs to be reconsidered. The setbacks, if there are to be any, should be something that is fitted into chicken raising and not to be something that governs it without evidence. The chickens really are good for friendship, neighborliness. The raisers I've talked to in Guelph, in Seattle, and in a couple of other places, all say that the children love them. The neighborhood kids are always coming over, and that they enjoy the chance for their own children to get used to having animals too. One chicken raiser in Seattle mentioned that his chickens got out once, and he was a little concerned about that, but then the neighbors saw that the chickens were eating those big slugs that are such a nuisance on the West Coast, and so now he actually, at their request, brings a chicken or 2 over to throw into the yards for their afternoon and clean up their slug problems, and everybody's happy, and he gives eggs to his neighbors, and he gets other things in return. The city of Portland has a set of regulations that I think are optimal. They regulate matters such as cleanliness, the things related to the health of chickens. Other things such as noise are covered by general city bylaws, so that you don't need any new things on that. In Portland, you do not need a permit for up to 3 chickens. If you wish to have a few more, and that may be a case if somebody's breeding a special breed, or if it's for an educational project, then you apply for a permit. Even if you don't have a permit, there are regulations that set standards. So if there is a complaint, if there's a concern, a complaint can be somebody being too upset about something that doesn't exist. We should take that into account. Sometimes a complaint is not a complaint, it's a concern. They wish to assist the city in helping somebody correct a mistake rather than taking something out against a neighbor. In Portland, they work the chickens into the municipal culture, and they have an annual tour de coops where there are prizes for the best coop architecture and various other things, and people come to look at the chickens, and it's a great event. One possible way of determining an optimal placement that the chicken raiser in Seattle suggested is start out with a coop that could be easily moved if necessary. Place it where seems to be optimal after talking to your neighbor, and if it doesn't quite work out, then you can shift it a bit afterwards. But I think that we've seen that these are inventive and creative people. They are adding to neighborliness. They know how to solve problems already, and we should let them have a go of it. And by the way, I forgot to introduce the matter that I represent the Waterloo Food System Roundtable, Waterloo Region Food System Roundtable. That's it.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Fernandez has a question for you.
No, not so much a question, but a comment regarding the Waterloo Region Roundtable. I would suspect that yourself and the Food System Roundtable are in supportive of backyard chickens.
Yes.
Okay. And are they, or do they put out any information or material that would help people who may not necessarily connect with the people who are here today to educate them on how to keep chickens?
I think that now that we can have online websites, there's an easy opportunity there to display practical information for chicken raisers, to alert them to the specifications of bylaws and regulations, to make friendly suggestions as to for self-operation, and for putting up a good educational website or brochures, or even consulting a self-help group or something, then put them to work to help you put those things in place. They know what they're talking about, and that's great.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks for coming in, Greg.
Right.
Thank you very much, Greg. That's all for our registered delegations. I didn't know if there's anyone else that had arrived late that still wanted to speak on this, but it doesn't appear so. So we can move on to questions of staff. And Councillor Ioannidis.
Thanks, Chair Schneider. My questions are basically on enforcement, and so just trying to get to the page. So when it comes to disposal, how are we gonna monitor that?
Through the chair, in terms of disposal, I've spoken with the region, and people can put shavings in regular garbage pickup. Other than that, we would have to fall back on a complaint system if people felt that somebody wasn't following the proper process or the bylaw, that we would have to respond out and do an investigation.
Okay. What about the end of life for the chickens? How are we going to monitor that?
Through the chair, I think it would be similar to any other pet that we have in terms of end of life. People can choose to go to a vet. As mentioned through some of the delegations, there are 2 companies, Pullets Plus and Backyard Bok Box, that do an exchange program if an animal's coming to end of life. And the other was, I mentioned in my report, as I mentioned, through a veterinarian or through a properly approved process of getting rid of them. They can't be placed in the garbage, though.
Okay. In regards to the online survey, when that was put out, because I'm looking at here, it's an overwhelming amount of input from people that basically didn't give a postal code. So that to me is really striking to me, that why is there such a high response without giving an indication of where they're from?
Josh Joseph from our Community Engagement Division.
Through the chair, great question. So with the Engage platform, citizens of Kitchener have two options. So they can either register a response with the city and provide their name, their address, and all those kind of details. And then they also have the option to just provide an anonymous online response, which is something typical we've done for many years in the past. Actually, a lot of our former surveys have been done that way. So Engage does take us a step further to give that option to at least start to collect kind of demographic information. We've, the results of this survey shows that we actually have, a bit of information more than we would have had in the past. And I would like to remind council that about 600 people did register. So it's not like it's a, small number, out of the total respondents, quite a number of people did actually choose to provide name and address.
Okay. My other question concerning about that is, since I've been around here, I've never seen anything that's been such overwhelmingly supported by the community. So, is there any other incidences where we've had such a high support? It was an 87.
That's right. Click back in.
I can't speak on specific examples. I do know that to give you some context of how this survey did and compared to other surveys that we've done on Engage, it was very popular. So there was definitely a spike of responses in a very short period of time. Most of the responses kind of trickled in over about a month period. I think a reason for that is because people were so passionate about this topic, and I think we find that when there are topics like this that people really care about, they do rally and kind of, as we've seen, there's a petition going around, and so there's a lot of community interest that way. But I know that there's been broad support for a number of city projects. Like I guess the most recent example that comes to mind is the Iron Horse Trail strategy that I led last year. There was a lot of positive support around that project, and a lot of people were saying similar things. So I'm sure there's many other examples that I may or may not be able to speak on because I don't have direct experience, but the ones that I've been involved with, there has been a lot of support and enthusiasm for going the direction of, for example, sustainable transportation, and in this case, sustainable food practices and that sort of thing.
Okay, can you recall what the Iron Horse Trail, what support was that received?
So I think there was about 30 recommendations in there, but the gist of the support was around the fact that the trail's very well used, very well loved in the community, and that it serves multi-purpose. So it's not just a transportation route, it's not just a recreation route, it's not just a cultural route, it's all of those things. So that was kind of the broad support that we received through the feedback.
Okay, but what was the overall percentage-wise?
Yeah, I can get that information to you. I'm not entirely sure because, like I said, there was 30-some recommendations, right? So a project of that scope and magnitude, there's not one, final result, but there is the strategy, and I can follow up if you have more specific questions.
Okay, I see my time's up, but I'll cue back in.
Okay, thanks so much. Councillor Gazzola.
I have a few questions of Gloria. I went over all of the recommendations in the bylaw, and I don't have much problems with them. There's a few here, like sale of eggs and other things are not allowed. Why not?
Through the chair, it's my understanding that if you're selling a product like that, you have to go through an inspection process through public health. So in terms of us trying to manage that, we just found it was if somebody wants to give their neighbor eggs, they can do so, but to actually sell them, you're running into issues with under zoning regulations and requiring occupancy certificates as well as inspections by public health. It just complicated it. So in terms of having somebody go through all of that in order to just sell a few eggs, we didn't want to go through that process.
I can appreciate that. Well, I thought once you put a limit of 4 chickens, it's not going to be a big commercial operation. Although then it leads to my next, well, how about home slaughter of chickens? I want to eat a chicken, I can't kill it and eat it? Why not? What's...
We currently don't permit home slaughtering of anything, so that just kind of went in line with the existing regulations. As I've learned through going through this process, there are places that you can, if you wanted to have chickens, you can take them to have them processed. We just don't want people doing that on their property in a residential area.
I suppose if I did that, though, yeah. The other question I had is, the owner has to reside there. Again, if you had people that are regular or whatnot, and they didn't have the property, but they had somebody else, but that's outlawed. They have to live there, even if they had a neighbor that would allow them to put a chicken coop in their yard. If they can, again, why so strict?
Through the chair, what we tried to do was we took all of the concerns that were expressed from people that were non-supporters and tried to find that balance that would work for everybody. One of the concerns that was brought forward to us was people were concerned that if there was a tenant situation and tenants had chickens and didn't care for them, ultimately they're not responsible for the property. So that's why we put some regulations in around that. And in terms of having the owner reside there, I mean, that's something that we could look at if this goes forward and we look at formulating a bylaw, but at this point we just thought that kind of went in line with having the owner ultimately responsible for their property and ensuring that they're complying.
Yeah, do we have a bylaw now that says chickens are not allowed?
Correct, we do.
That period?
Right.
Yeah. Do you have any idea of how many chicken areas we do have now? Illegal, but
Through going through this process, we have come to realize that there's probably about 15 or 20, there may be even more than that, but just through doing some of the public consultation and people that came to these meetings, there are certainly more than we were aware of to begin with.
Do you have any idea how the numbers in a place like Guelph that have always had it? Is it a huge number, or?
I did not get any specific numbers from Guelph, but they also don't have a registry program that I was advised of. But they did say that they really don't have any issues with it at all. Their setbacks are a little bit greater than what we're proposing, but they've had it in place for a long time and haven't had issues.
Okay, I don't have very few problems. I would like to have you consider. I would like to see a random inspection basis, as opposed to having to go out there when they get a permit. So that you could cover the whole community, depending on how many of these we have, but periodically to have the opportunity to go in and see that things are in shape. The way we have the way you're setting it up here now, people pay this one-time fee, you inspect it at the beginning, and then that's it. You don't really have, the only other opportunity you're going to have, I gather, would be on a complaint basis, which may be too late. Was there any consideration given to a ongoing random inspection?
Through the chair, we hadn't considered that at this time, but that's something that we can certainly look at considering. I think we would have a better idea if we did go down the road of allowing chickens, if we had people register and knew exactly how many we'd be doing. That would give us a better indication of how many staff we'd have to look at in terms of resources for doing proactive inspections.
Okay, thank you. I have a quick question for Josh. There was a lot of good information in those reports. I would like even some help at more understanding what all the things that were, but they gave us a great deal of information. I counted 585 that had postal codes, and I looked at the map on the back here, and it only had 508 scattered throughout the 10 wards. Where did we lose the other 77?
I believe the other 77, and I think at the time that I prepared that map, I excluded that by error, but I think the other 77 are actually outside Waterloo. Okay. So those are, or Kitchener, sorry. So those are people that registered, gave an address, and it happened to be Cambridge or Waterloo, somewhere like that.
Thank you. And I do want to emphasize that there was an awful lot of good information that going down the road, I hope it even improves. And you can also give us a little more information on how to interpret things that we're seeing. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Singh.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Before I ask the questions, and my questions are for Gloria, I'll quickly say that I can appreciate the delegations that came before us, and quite clearly these are individuals that are well-versed in how to keep backyard chickens and have expressed themselves to be very responsible. But my concerns lie in, through my question earlier, I had mentioned this too, going forward as the uptake increases and we have residents that may not be as well-minded or suited to carry this practice. What type of resource is going to be required? Like right now, we have about 300 residents that have backyard chickens, correct? Close to 300?
Not that I'm aware of. I'm only aware of about 15 to 20 residents through this process.
Okay, so when we based on a one-time fee of $50 and also indicated that there would be review and inspections, have we factored as to what number of residents that we can maintain this type of kind of enforcement and review without requiring additional resources by the bylaw department? All the conditions are fine. I think this will encourage good practice and safeguard complaints, as well as ensure, biosecurity issues as well. But what type of, if we want to enforce it, having just bylaw for the sake of bylaw doesn't mean much if we don't have the right resources to ensure that there's proper oversight. So do we have that resource to maintain within existing resource levels? And if more people carry this on beyond the 30 or 40, as you said, that we know of, would we have to then hire or take on more bylaw officers?
Through the chair, at this point, we have no idea of knowing how many people will come forward. What I've done is I've contacted these other municipalities that do permit backyard chickens and had that conversation with them. What I've heard from all of them consistently is that there seems to be, a lot of concern when they're doing the research on the background of whether or not to permit them, but when it actually comes into place, there's very few people that have taken them up on it. So for the most part, it has continued to be the people that had chickens prior to the bylaw going into place that have continued to keep them. They really haven't had that much interest come forward. So I'm not anticipating that we're going to be flooded with people wanting chickens.
So with that practice, then why not grandfather? Why not allow a grace period for people to come forward and register, but saying no, backyard chickens are not allowed? That's not an activity that we can manage to support because it's going to require oversight and resources and a burden onto the tax base. But we are going to allow those that already have it. It's an activity that we don't want to, penalize on if people have been doing it already. Was that a consideration?
Through the chair, at this
as,
point...
as opposed to a blanket approval.
Right. At this point, they're not permitted, so they wouldn't be grandfathered. So it would be, that would be a different...
allowing a grace period if we...
Right. So that would be a different road that we'd be going down then if council wanted us to consider looking at that instead.
Was that option ever considered?
No, we haven't considered that at this point.
Again, assumptions mean nothing. Data is everything. So when looking at, like size municipalities, Guelph obviously is about half the size as we are, but there were other municipalities that were referenced, and I think Seattle and Portland as well, or larger municipalities. Do we know how many people would have this type of activity going on in those municipalities? So we can see, related to a municipality of our size, we could estimate through data of how many people might, in the future or soon after, allowing such bylaw here in Kitchener as well. Do we have any understanding of that?
Through the chair, the only municipality that I've spoken with that actually has a registration process is the City of Kingston, and they estimate that they have approximately 25 people.
25 people. And
have backyard
when they
chickens.
register, they do inspections as well?
Correct.
Or? Okay. And Kingston, of course, is smaller and it's more surrounded to a rural community. Okay. Now, some of the other issues that have come up and concern in my mind anyways, aspect of biosecurity. The bylaw does lay out good practice in cleaning and sanitizing the coop. Now, if people do not care, are not mindful and they're not responsible with their activity, are we able to lay fines through the bylaw? How would we be able to enforce them to do it?
Through the chair, it would become part of our animal bylaw. So it would be similar to rabbits, which we currently allow, and other animals that are in there. And we would do an inspection. We would issue a notice requiring them to comply with and clean up the deficiencies. And if they didn't comply, then we would have the ability to lay a charge. So the maximum fine is the $5,000 that's associated with that bylaw, and that's the route that we would have to take.
So my apologies. My understanding of this is not as strong. So I'm basing it on assumptions, some of the information that I'm presuming it on. But of course, disease can spread through, or I've heard of through, having chickens and stuff or birds. I haven't heard of diseases spread through rabbits. Is that the case? Is that a concern that we need to be mindful of in ensuring that the bylaw is fine-tuned enough to ensure that we're safeguarding our citizens too?
So just to clarify, you're asking about chicken diseases through chickens that we should be mindful of?
That's right.
So I know the most common one is the avian influenza. And in doing some research and speaking with a veterinarian that specializes in chickens, she did say that humans would need to be in direct contact with a bird that was infected. So being a neighboring property living next door, you wouldn't be impacted by that if something like that were to happen. We've also only had 2 outbreaks of it in past years, so it's not something that's very common. But we could certainly look at, when we're going through the process of writing the bylaw, ensuring that we've got some really good regulations in there in terms of sanitary conditions.
I would strongly encourage that. Thank you.
Thank you. Mayor Verbanovic.
Thank you very much, and thank you to staff for the great work on this report, as well as to all of the delegations that came in today on this issue. Just a few questions, Gloria, if I can. On the distance issue, and I understand why you're recommending what you are, but the suggestion of an exemption if the neighbors to both sides of you and behind you were amenable to it, is that something that could be worked into the bylaw?
Through the chair, I just had a quick minute with Ms. Shearer here, and I think that's something that we could look at considering. We would have to put something in place to ensure that if that neighbor moved or if they no longer wanted the chickens there, that we would have to kind of be prepared for that.
Okay, well, that certainly seemed like a reasonable approach. On the issue of number of chickens, and I understand why you've gone with 4, and checking a number of municipalities, it seems to be where they're at. Some sort of push it up to 6. We heard some mixed suggestions on that today. is there any opportunity, from staff's perspective, I mean, could there be any logic behind going to 6? Or at the very least, where 6 do exist, potentially grandfathering them until they get to their end of life?
Through the chair, I have no concerns with increasing it to 6 if council chooses to go that route. 4 was just a number where, again, we were trying to find that balance for people that were not supportive of chickens at all, and came up several times through our research as a number that was really easily managed. So in terms of ensuring that people were able to keep up with the daily care for the chickens and ensure that there wasn't going to be issues with smell, that we went with the 4.
Okay, but we could either go to 6 or potentially grandfather those additional ones, barring there's no complaints or something like that?
Yes.
Okay. On the issue of tenants, that's one that I guess worries me a little bit, because more and more as housing affordability changes, and quite frankly with the millennial generation, less and less are they wanting to purchase homes, and yet it's a generation that very much may be interested in pursuing this. So I'm a little concerned around the potential of not allowing tenants and I don't know, I don't quite frankly even know if that would withstand a constitutional challenge if somebody wanted to challenge that. So I'm trying to understand where we're coming from on that, and can we revisit that?
Through the chair, majority of our bylaws always fall back, the responsibility always falls back to the owner, and that's what we were getting at through that. So I think if a tenant wanted to have chickens and had consent of the owner to do so, we would certainly be, that would be allowable. We just didn't want to be in a position where somebody were to have chickens, and because they're a rental property, we're then a little bit more limited in terms of being able to do anything with it, or the charges ultimately go back to the owner of the property.
Right. No, I understand that, and I think we'd have to have some component where if the owner was amenable to it. But I think we're moving into a period where we're going to see more and more of that, and so I think we need to, this is proactive bylaw, and assuming we go down this path, I'd like to see us be proactive from a full perspective. The last piece, and I'll just touch on, because I know there's been some questions around, registered users versus unregistered users and so on. And I have to admit, I mean, I was blown away that even on the registered user side, the numbers were as high as they are, because it's certainly a lot more than we would see on many things. But I guess two questions. If I think of another issue that generated as many responses, and it may be before, well, maybe not before your time, Gloria, but I would say the casino issue probably generated as many issues and some strong opinions on it. But on other areas like the neighborhood survey and others, are we not seeing sort of a similar split that some, that probably a good chunk are willing to give us their postal code, and another chunk aren't, but are engaging in the process? And I'm thinking some of that may be just until people get used to engage, or some people just want to have the anonymity of it and will never change that. But that has always been the case of our engagement processes. I'm wondering if staff can comment on that.
Through the chair. So as you've mentioned, for this survey, 600 people is quite a lot of numbers for people giving address. What we have started doing on Engage Kitchener now, you'll notice, is that every single survey we put up there, we ask for the first 3 digits of the postal code. So because this was one of the first surveys we didn't have as many processes worked out, and so we went through a bit of lessons learned, and we found that if we ask an optional question that says, what are the first 3 digits of your postal code, much more people will actually answer that. So we are able to see on other surveys that we've done, the N2H or N2G or areas where people are living. And so we've kind of started to do that as a standard practice. And you still will see people skip the question, but it's a lot less than the number of people who actually will choose not to register.
Okay. Councillor Yudetsky.
Yes, thank you. And it's a very good report, Gloria. Appreciate all the work that you had gone through to do this. In looking at the details and the survey that was asked of people as to whether they'll want to raise chickens in their single-family dwellings, semi-detached townhouses, apartments, and of course singles were quite strong, as well as semis and townhouses, and of course apartments were opposed. When I look at this report, I'm assuming that what you're approving is for chickens to be in singles, semis, and townhouses?
Through the chair, what we've done is we've put the setback regulations in place so that regardless of whether it's a single, semi, they have to meet that setback regulation in order to have them. So if you have a semi that has a bigger backyard and can meet that 3-meter setback, then they would be permitted chickens. If they can't, then they wouldn't be able to have them.
Okay, so all those 3 uses, as long as they meet the regs, can have them. Okay, that's fine. Enforcement was asked to a general degree, and when I look on page 5.2 of your report, you've got about 24 bullet points in terms of areas of requirements, things that need to be done, setbacks, regulations, sanitation, et cetera, and you indicated that there are other bylaws that deal with noise, animal regulations, et cetera. What would be the process if you've got complaints on some of these regulations, or when you do inspections, there are issues, and the homeowner, and notwithstanding the 5 delegations that were here this afternoon who made excellent presentations, excellent arguments on behalf of having urban chickens, and I thought that was very, very well done. But of course, of all the people who are very, very conscious, there's always a bunch of rotten apples that don't want to follow the rules but still want to have chickens. How will enforcement take place in terms of you following through if you get complaints, letter of notice, so much time to correct it? What's your process?
Through the chair, our process would be to do an inspection, provide the homeowner a letter with a list of deficiencies and a timeline in order to complete those and get their property back into good standing. If they didn't comply with those, then we would fall back with laying a charge.
So the charge is that fine up to $5,000?
Correct.
So that means going through a proper legal notification process, taking them to court, and doing what you have to.
Correct, yes.
And that would fall on, when I look at one of the reports, you've got a noise bylaw, you've got animal regulation bylaws, lot maintenance or property standards scenario, so you'd follow under those bylaw regulations? Is that what they do?
Through the chair, what we put in place for that was that any existing bylaws that may apply would still be in effect for this bylaw if it does get passed. So if we had a complaint about the chickens being noisy, then we could apply the noise bylaw if the officer believed there was enough evidence there to support a charge for something like that. So I just didn't want council to be left with the impression that any other bylaws that we currently have in place that could apply would not be applicable to this.
Okay. All right. It seems reasonable in terms of what you've got, just a matter of following through what you have to do if there is an issue. Okay, thank you.
Councillor Etherington.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to Gloria. Gloria, back in days when dinosaurs roamed the world instead of chickens, I grew up in England in a house next to several chicken coops in a neighbor's backyard. Now, those coops were filthy and attracted rats and vermin. Despite that fact, I'm willing to support your recommendations on condition, and I realize this is difficult, but on condition you can tell me you have enough staff to police the bylaw. Do you have enough to staff the bylaw, to police the bylaw? Or are you going to be coming back to us at some future date to request another bylaw enforcement officer or two?
Through the chair, again, it's difficult to estimate how many people are going to come forward. We don't imagine it's going to be a great number. in terms of setting up the registration process and that initial inspection, we've set that up similar to pool complaints and how we deal with those now, and that, you know, we get a few up front and we may be busier at the onset, but it will trickle off. So at this point, I'm not anticipating a huge influx of people wanting chickens, and I certainly think that we could manage anything that comes forward. It'll be busier in the beginning, I'm sure, if we do pass this, getting through some of those inspections, but I imagine it will trickle off.
Okay. Now, you and I we've worked on a number of cases involving people who deliberately ignore or flaunt bylaws, and I'm sure you're going to be running into this with chickens, and several other councillors have asked you about that. You would still say, looking at that workload, that you have adequate staff?
Through the chair, through the research that we've done and in speaking with a lot of these residents that currently have chickens, it's my understanding that if you don't have a good, clean coop that's well maintained, you're not going to get a chicken that produces eggs. Therefore, they're going to be defeating the purpose of why they have them. So it's in their best interest to ensure that they are staying on top of it. It's also money invested. It's quite a bit of an investment for them up front. So again, I think there's a lot of thought that has to go into it ahead of getting them, as opposed to some other animals that you can pick up and then you're not, you know, aware of the cost. So the cost for this seems to be up front, and I think you will have people considering that before they do it.
And after everything you've heard this afternoon, do you still feel that that $50 fee is suitable or adequate?
Through the chair, again, that fee amount was a balance for taxpayers that we heard from that did not want their tax dollars going towards an inspection process, for somebody who wanted chickens, as well as people who are interested saying that they didn't want any fee at all. So we tried to look at it from a staffing perspective, the cost of having an officer go out, do that initial inspection, and to process that application. So it was a nominal fee in order to cover those initial costs, but we weren't looking to make money off of it.
Okay, and one last question. If you go in on a bad case of someone not taking care of chickens, if a vet is required or that kind of service, who pays for that? Who will pay for it?
Through the chair, it would be the owner of the chickens that would be responsible for that, similar to a cat or dog owner.
Okay, thank you. Thanks very much.
Councillor Galloway-Sealock and Son.
I just want to follow up on one of the questions, and I'd like Mr. May to answer it, because I don't think it's necessarily fair for Gloria to answer. But would it be fair to say, irrespective of this specific bylaw, that bylaw staff is probably under-resourced and may need more staffing moving forward if we were to increase level of service?
Through you, Mr. Chair, a few years ago, Council did add 2 additional bylaw enforcement officers to the division that helped us on resourcing. I think what we've heard from Council on a number of occasions is some interest in moving from a reactive enforcement model to a proactive enforcement model. If that is Council's desire, we would be looking at additional resources. Having said that, that is not the recommendation before you today. Here is reactive.
Right. No, and that's fair. I just wanted to make sure that we kept them separate. Okay. So my questions where I want to focus on is the setback regulations. I'm looking to be, I'll say, more inclusive than this permits. How big is a typical coop? I understand there's probably different sizes, but how big for 4 would you typically need the coop to be? Just a ballpark number in feet.
Through the chair, I would say smaller than a 10 by 10 structure.
Okay.
So which is about an average shed that doesn't require a permit.
Okay. I'm concerned that with the side lot lines at 3 meters, that's fairly close to 10 feet. If I've done if my calculator's done the conversion, right? And we've got a lot of lots in the city that are 30 feet or less, at least in the area that I represent. And so if we've got 10 feet on either side and we've got a structure we're barely fitting that, and if we want to include anything from a townhouse perspective, those are, they're just not going to fit. What's the justification for the side lot lines more than the rear at 3 meters?
Through the chair, the sideline setbacks are to take into consideration that people will often have decks or patios beside their neighboring property. So if somebody were to be sitting outside, there were concerns expressed about smell and nuisance. So we wanted to take that into consideration and have that setback there so that people could still have enjoyment of their property on the other side of that fence.
Right. If we looked at something that was more like a 2.5 meter, which brings us down to like an 8 foot, approximately an 8 foot, so we're still a distance away from the side lot lines, but that may allow for some of the smaller properties within the city to actually incorporate this if they chose. Would that be something you'd be concerned with?
Through the chair, I'm open to any suggestions that council may have. These were some that we had put together as a result of speaking with some other municipalities and what was working there. 3 meters is the smallest setback that we have come across in doing our research with other municipalities. So we started at the 3 meter mark.
Yeah. What was the largest setback that you saw? Do you recall?
15 meters, which is in Guelph. So they're a 50-foot setback.
Okay. I will think that over because I want to try and, my aim is to be inclusive, to try to be inclusive as many properties as possible, but still allow for some of the reasons that you give for 3 meters. So I'm going to think that over. I know there's still a lot of people in the queue, so I'll think that over and see what I'm going to do moving forward. Thank you for your answers.
Great. Thank you. Councillor Davey.
Thank you, Chair Schneider. So just a couple of questions. I'm a little bit concerned too about the media coverage of this and people. You've assured in the other examples we've seen is that not many people will take this up, but my concern is we have like pretty much every media outlet covering this story for reasons I don't quite understand. But my concern is the number of people that go out there and think this is a good idea without doing the research. So I understand in the bylaw you're making it, for example, illegal to slaughter the chickens, and my understanding is then that would go under the animal bylaw. So that would be sort of a cruelty to animal type charge if they were to engage in that activity, or I guess what would happen if we found out that occurred?
Through the chair, currently if we have a complaint of somebody slaughtering animals, we do refer that to the Humane Society and they do an investigation.
Okay. And again, I don't know a whole lot about the ability of chickens to handle extreme weather conditions, for example. And I know that the coops will be inspected, but do we have the understanding and knowledge to determine whether a chicken coop can safely keep the hens safe in extreme cold temperatures, for example?
Through the chair, it's my understanding that chickens really don't even require to be, the coops don't require to be heated in the winter. That they do generate enough heat through the way they gather and lay together that they can keep themselves warm. But there are things that people can do in order to winterize their coops for the winter through insulating and providing shavings and whatnot.
Okay, that's helpful. My other questions, let's see, grandfathering was covered. Okay, sorry, and a couple quick questions of Josh. I appreciate we just launched our Engage system recently, so I think you're probably going to see a few questions about this as we get more data coming back. I think I asked this before, I need clarification. Do we log IP, like since we see people aren't entering in all the information, do we log IP addresses to make sure there isn't duplication? Or, for example, one person filling out the survey 26 times to sway the opinion?
Through the chair, yes, the system does track IP and browser address, so if we were to see multiple entries from a single computer, it would be flagged. And I did actually ask the vendor to run kind of an analysis for this specific survey just to see if any issues did come up, and they reported none.
Okay. I don't need to comment on this, but I am aware that you can roughly, like not a precise location, but you can get an approximate location of someone based on their IP address. That might be something we want to look into in the future for Engage Kitchener, just to make sure we are getting results from within our municipality.
All right. Councillor Ioannidis.
Thank you, Chair Schneider. Gloria, did it ever come to your opinion or staff's opinion on many other issues that we deal with to maybe run a pilot program before we implement this citywide?
Through the chair, that was one of the considerations that we looked at, and actually one of our public meetings that we engaged people in getting some feedback on. It wasn't something that was ideally supported when we did the public consultation process, just because people felt we'll be in the same, we'll be back here again in a couple years to relook at it, but that was something that we had actually initially thought of proposing, and if council thought that that was a better route, we could certainly look at that.
Okay. Well, I can totally understand individuals who are supportive of wanting to see this implement, but we also have a responsibility to look out for the greater good of the community, and I have an alternative motion to put forward if the time is appropriate, because I have some concerns with this.
Right. Councillor Fernandez.
Thank you. I don't really have a lot of questions because a lot of them have been asked and answered, and I feel that Gloria, you and your staff have done a really great job of reaching out to the public. I don't want to turn this into comments because I have comments. I do like the suggestion about the 2.5. I think that we should be open to that. The only question I really have is that when the inspections are in process or completed, first, how long do you expect an inspection to take, and will our staff have to go? So say, for example, they've gone out and they've seen deficiencies, they have to go back. How many times do you think our staff are willing to, or are you prepared for them to go back and back and back until somebody's got everything correct?
Through the chair, the process that we're proposing for this application or registration process is that we're hoping to have people come to us prior. So you have to first fill out your application to get a permit, and then we would go out, do an inspection, ensure that they can meet the setbacks and that everything is in proper order prior to them even getting their hens. So we should be able to alleviate a lot of those concerns up front rather than after the fact. In terms of people that have existing chickens, if something like this were to go through now, we would certainly have to give them until the spring in order to, have a bylaw in place, let them know what the regulations were, and then take the weather into consideration. So as long as we felt that people were working with us and making progress, we would work with them. But if we felt that that wasn't happening, then we would do as we normally have to do and resort to charges.
Okay. One of the items that was in the presentation from Mr. Mikolenko was about the dust bath area. And I forgot to ask our delegates if that is a large piece of the coop, a small piece of the coop. I mean, are our neighbors going to say, I'm being inundated with dust now because the chickens are doing their dust bath? I totally forgot to ask that question.
Through the chair, it's my understanding that a dust bath is normally within the pen area. So it wouldn't be out in the run area, and that it's just a small area that they can dust themselves off in. Okay.
When the inspections are completed, will residents be receiving something like, when they have a building permit that they can put on the front of the house or on the coop that says, checked off, been inspected, and we're good to go, so that if they have questions from neighbors, it will put the neighbors' concerns aside?
Through the chair, we hadn't thought of that, but that's something that we can certainly look at. We were looking at it from an internal process where if we had that registry process and we could go onto our system and see that an officer had been there and it had passed an inspection, that we would be able to, let people know that route when they called in a concern about it, that it had already gone through that process and been inspected.
Okay, and certainly that we want to be as paperless as possible, but there may be some incidences where residents don't have access to computers. Yes, they'll be able to make a call, and I think that's certainly a good first step. But in future, when neighbors change, it might be good to have something that people can sort of show and say, "Yeah, I've been inspected, I've been checked off, and I'm good to go." Thanks.
Councillor Marsh.
Thank you. I do have some comments, more than questions. So maybe if you can come back to me when questions are done.
Sure. Councillor Singh.
Yes. Gloria, before I even ask this, my apologies because you've been berated with this question over and over again about just us being able to have the necessary resources to be able to maintain this bylaw. Through Councillor Ioannidis' question about pilot project, many of the bylaws that we've considered not to act in a rash manner, we've taken our time to implement in a smaller area, like parking on a boulevard, which is defined to a smaller area as part of our city. So why not? I hear you what you said, that it would cause an issue where we would just have to bring this issue back again in the forefront in public dialogue. It's better to just get it over and done with. But because we don't have the ability to have proactive enforcement, it's more reactionary. But with a limited number of people that we know that are carrying on this activity, 15 to 20, as you said, my assumption is that we probably have the resources to be able to proactively monitor how they do it going forward until we can really assess that this is something that the citywide activity can carry on well, and it can be managed through a reactionary enforcement method. So why not try that, considering that approach in a trial project?
Through the chair, if that is the direction that council wants us to explore, we can certainly look at doing a pilot project. At this point, as I mentioned, that was one of the strategies that was discussed at a public meeting, and there was not a lot of favor for that. I think in terms of some of the other concerns were that if we were to try a pilot project, that it would be citywide and that people would be able to register to be part of that pilot project as opposed to just choosing a ward. I think there were some concerns around that.
Well, through the public engagement, and Josh might be better able to help, were we able to, through the presentation, a short or darker mass in the Ward 9 and 10 through respondents? Did I understand that correctly? Does that mean that there were more respondents from that area that gave their input?
Yeah, that's correct.
And it was quite differentiating. It was clearly from Ward 9 and 10 where the over-resounding opinion came from as opposed to citywide. So through that data, is it fair to presume that that's where the overwhelming support and input has been received?
I think it's safe to say that for sure from the registered user perspective, yeah.
So that could be an area that could be defined then?
Through the chair, we could certainly look at doing that. I know from the delegations that are here today, some of them wouldn't fall within wards 9 and 10, so I think that's where some of the concerns came up when we proposed it as a potential project or trial area. So that would be something for council to take into consideration.
Well, I'm guessing that's something that could be maybe fine-tuned with Councillor Ioannidis putting forward the suggestion. If he is bringing forward an amendment, hopefully he can pinpoint that. The other thing is, if we were to go with that direction, and I'm liking that more and more as I continue to ask you questions on it, with the sort of limited area, would we have the ability to actively enforce?
Through the chair, again, it would come down to how many people we actually had that were partaking in the program. So if we had 15 or 20, I don't see that as being problematic in terms of proactive inspections.
And this way would, highlight exactly how many there really are. Right now we're presuming there's 15 to 20, and if we're fair with that assessment, I think this is something we can manage. But if it's overwhelming a lot more, then that would perhaps give us a pause too, based on the enforcement resources required. Okay, thank you. Appreciate that.
Mr. May?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair. I just feel that perhaps I can provide some additional information. My understanding from Ms. McNeil is that we expect that one of these inspections will take approximately 1 hour. So we're in no means saying that this is a significant amount of time, and that's a one-time inspection. So once that first group is done, if there is a bit of growth, we believe we can do it within existing resources.
Just quickly.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, Mr. May, I appreciate the clarification, but perhaps I wasn't as clear. My concern, and I think I share it with a few others, is that I feel at least, it should be active enforcement, just for us to really implement this the right way. And that's where the concern lies. Do we have the resource for ongoing active enforcement, not just the initial assessment, but carrying forward with inspections, so that the very well laid out report, and I can't compliment enough how in-depth this report is, but there are very good recommendations in COOP regulations and sanitation. Well, they're all fine and handy, but if you don't know what they're carrying on with it, it's not serving anyone any good. So it's about making sure that this is being followed through as outlined by the bylaw.
Thank you. Sorry?
I fully appreciate it's healthy to have a variety of opinions here, but we haven't got to the point of comments yet, and I would just appreciate that if we could stick to questions until such time as the motion is on the floor, which I have ready when the chair is ready to take it, and then there will be, I'm sure, time for anyone who's ready to comment to do so.
Okay. Would you like to respond?
I was responding to Mr. May's comment, Councillor Marsh, and I think I had the right to be able to answer that back, but I will be making a comment afterwards.
All right. Councillor Davey.
Sorry, I'm comment.
Comment? Okay. All right, comments? Comments. Okay. Councillor Singh for comments. Well, she clicked out. If you want to click back in, I'll click. Okay. All right.
Sorry, Dave.
All right, Councillor Marsh. Sorry.
All right. So I, as indicated earlier, have put the staff's motion on the floor, but based on discussion, I'd like to add 2 amendments. So I've added those in writing to add to the existing motion. So those additions are that staff be directed to add a provision allowing a 2.5 meter setback and smaller backyard setbacks if immediate neighbors were to consent. Also, I'd like to add a provision allowing up to 6 hens when larger setbacks exist. Putting this motion on the floor, I just want to make a few comments. So first of all, we've heard a few questions about, what other issues have brought such high amount of comments. I mean, in our term of council, the one that comes to mind is the consultation on the Centre in the Square, where we had over 3,000 people come forward with their opinions. We also had a comment that data means everything, but we can't make assumptions. And we've heard a few times now that the data is clear after a whole year of consultation that staff have found 15 to 20 coops exist in Kitchener. That's the data. And so, maybe a few more will come forward, but we're not going to get hundreds and hundreds of coops coming forward as soon as we pass this motion. We have had 5 articulate and thoughtful delegations from the community today, and these are not representative of just a few outliers. These are all 5 have talked about the responsible ownership of hens, and we've had comment that, the rest are just a bunch of rotten. We're going to have a bunch of rotten apples that will. I mean, we've got this motion is incredibly thorough. We're not going to allow for any rotten apples in terms of keeping hens. We have all of the necessary things in place to make sure that we are going to have responsible hen ownership. Kingston, where they do have they do allow chickens, is not a rural town. It's a city of 170,000 people, so not a whole lot smaller than our community. And I just want to also point to the fact that in the proposed bylaw on page 5.2, there is already a provision that allows for people who are renting their residence, if they have written permission from the owner of the property, that they can keep a coop. So I think that that's a really positive step in the right direction. And also that when we were talking about ownership, we were talking about the owners of the chickens. They must reside on the property where they're kept. And I agree with Councillor Gazzola that, if a neighbor allows a coop, maybe that should be allowed. But for now, I think while we're piloting this project citywide, that we should be able to to keep this in place for now and perhaps amend it as needed. I'm sure that, councillors around the table wouldn't want to assume that it's only Ward 9 and 10 that have interest in keeping hens, when we've had a few delegates coming forward today who don't reside in Ward 9 and 10. And it very well may be that on the Engage Kitchener platform, that the high number of proponents who came forward and responded may well have been against chickens. We don't know where they all came from. We don't know where the yeses came from and where the noes came from, do we? Do we know?
Sorry, only on the registered users we know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the majority didn't provide that information.
Right. Okay. All right. So that's all I have for now. Thank you.
Okay. And Councillor Ioannidis, you were going to bring forth another motion, so is it time to hear that amendment now? Okay. And would you like to explain your amendment?
Yeah. The reason why I'm putting this forth is for several reasons. And because I know Councillor Marsh had mentioned a pilot in a specific area of Ward 9 or 10 or whatever wouldn't make sense. But when I look at the statistics, I really see very minimal response from people that I represent. And when I looked at the petition, it was very minimal response from residents that I represent. And in fact, I've had more response on the negative side towards the positive side. And so that's why I want to be fair to the process, and that's why I want to put forth an amendment. And as you had mentioned, the data doesn't lie. Well, the data says most of the people that were for the specific is Ward 9 and 10. So that's why I think it's a natural progression to put it in Ward 9, 10 for a year's time, just to gather the information and make sure we get our facts 100% accurate, and where they're actually postal code, we know where they're coming from, and I think that's the best way to go before we do this citywide. I don't want us to cross the road like the chicken does before we get to that. So I want to make sure we do it right. And so that's why I want to put in forth that the current chicken owners that still be allowed to keep their coops, and we'll keep suspending the bylaw until such time the committee decides. But more importantly, for myself, I could care less about the setbacks if we implement item number 2, in addition, that chicken owners obtain their direct neighbors on all sides of their property permission, and if not, all agreeable, then it wouldn't be permitted. And it only be on those new registered coops, not the ones that are already recognized now. So that's why I want to put this forth, because I think this is a logical step. We've done this on so many other bylaw issues. Instead of going citywide, we've taken that short step first, and this is the route I think we should be taking.
Okay. And Mayor Vanwick.
Thank you very much. And before you start the clock, I guess I'm looking for a ruling from you, because And I realize, you're in the chair for the first or close to first time. I would argue that in fact this is not an amendment, but rather is a contrary motion. It's totally opposite of what is being recommended by Councillor Marsh. And I would suggest that we dispose of Councillor Marsh's motion first. And then if it doesn't succeed, then I think this motion could potentially be on the table. But I guess I'm looking to you for a ruling.
Yeah, I'm getting... ask the clerk.
That's okay.
All right, after conferring with the clerks, the order would be that we vote on the original recommendation as amended by Councillor Marsh. So with your recommendations, we would vote on that first. Okay. Sorry, can you click in?
Respectfully, a point of order, Mr. Chair. Simply because I'd like to get a clarification from the clerk as well. Referenced earlier consideration of a bylaw of allowing parking on boulevards. We amended that motion in the same way, and we had taken that as an amendment. It's my interpretation that the amendment that Councillor Ioannidis has put forward does allow, as the original motion puts forward, of having backyard chickens, only it defines a smaller area. And it does further amend the setback. It doesn't say, change the setback. It further provides some additional point to the setback requirements. If the clerk can give their assessment on now, how we had handled the previous motion a few years back and how this is different, a clarification would be helpful.
Would you like to click in? Oh, good.
Through you, Chair, it is permissible to do a substitution which would allow the amendment to include the additional clause for wards 9 and 10. It is to the discretion of the Chair whether or not the actual amendment is germane. In this case, the Chair has requested the first vote be taken. It is up to the Chair as to whether or not he would like to determine whether or not all of these clauses would then apply to the main motion. So currently on the floor is the main motion with various clauses to the actual regulations. If the clauses that Councillor Ioannidis has put forward are additional clauses to those, they would be amendments and can be voted on separately.
So can I then go into my comments, Mr. Chair?
Yes, please.
Thank
Okay.
Really?
Okay, Councillor Ioannidis.
Well, if it's not going to be accepted, why can't my clause number 2 be accepted as an amendment? It's not contrary to anything.
Okay. Sure.
Through the chair, if you would permit, if Councillor Ioannidis would permit to withdraw Clause 1 from his amendment and only put Clause 2 on the floor, then the amendment would be an additional clause to the main motion on the floor.
Are you amenable to that? Okay, so can we correct the whole, make sure that everything's up there, it's nice and clear for everybody to vote on? Okay, great. That is fine. So we'll vote on things separately.
I want to see the latest that the FBI found. Yeah. No, joke.
Okay, so we're still in comments.
Yes.
So,
and
Vrbanovic.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And again, I just want to begin by thanking staff and the community for their very thorough engagement in this issue. In my time on council, there have been very few issues that have generated the kind of wholehearted support for something as the chicken bylaw has. And while some would want to discount the unregistered users, that's perfectly fine. In fact, if we just look at the registered users, we see a higher percentage under the registered users, in fact, that supported seeing chickens being allowed in the city of Kitchener than we saw under the unregistered users. So in fact, at 514 who said yes, I think that certainly meets any reasonable threshold, especially when I've heard people around this horseshoe from time to time say that they've heard 10 people say something about issue X in their ward and therefore are compelled to vote in a certain direction based on that. We also heard from staff that the system was not gamed, and so I think we went into this engaged system, we need to support it. I think we heard some very strong arguments from residents around how this builds into environmental sustainability, economic viability, and social responsibility. If we are truly going to be moving towards and working and seeing ourselves develop into a progressive community built on principles of sustainability, that means change. And these are one of the areas that speak to that change in cities that have seen and seen this work in extremely positive ways. Now, people are concerned that all of a sudden there's going to be thousands of these facilities potentially showing up in the city of Kitchener. Well, if I can believe an article that I saw in Vancouver, in fact, from 2010, when there was an estimated 13 of these, we saw it go up to a whopping 200 by 2016. I think that is a number that if we see the same experience here in Kitchener over 7 years, we can more than manage. But this speaks to the kinds of things that we know are important to our residents. It speaks to issues of food security. It speaks to issues of the 100-mile diet. It speaks to the kinds of things that we know we've heard through the neighborhood survey and through other consultations that we've done around community gardens and community markets and so on. And while this is not going to have or allow for people to sell the product, it certainly will allow them to share it with neighbors. And we saw the kind of interactions some of today's speakers spoke of in their own neighborhoods as young people and so on came together and tried to move away from this, through this tech world, which is, progress is good. But I mean, in many ways, we're moving away from a world of Angry Birds and Pac-Man and other things and moving to one where we're actually trying to show people and show young people some of the basics that are so important in terms of our survival as human society. So I would encourage council to have the courage necessary to embrace change, to embrace what already exists in many large urban centers across North America, Europe, and other parts of the world. And again, I'll say urban centers. And support this so that we can continue to show that we are the progressive community that we regularly demonstrate ourselves to be. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Vivanovic. Councillor Etherington.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I'll keep it simple. I support the very thorough staff report and recommendations, but I've already warned that I will not be supporting any hiring of increased bylaw staff to work on chicken-related complaints. I'll spare my comments on the amendments before us, but I would say that I want us to move on with this topic. I think staff and council have no need to further exhaust this issue. We've spent enough time. Let's move on.
Councillor Singh.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And with complete honesty, I approached today coming in planning on not supporting this. Because the way I consider it, I though appreciate the comments put forward by Mayor Vivanovic, I see our city as encouraged by the province, Places to Grow Act, and us encouraging greater intensification within our city limits. So this type of activity doesn't coincide with that type of vision that I see. But it's because of the well-thought-out report that staff have put forward, and because of the delegations that came before and passionately expressed, what responsible persons they are when carrying forward in keeping in backyard hens. Where it gives me still some pause is, and I said this, that data is everything. We can't base on assumptions. Right now we have 15 to 20 people. And we are assuming that that number will be probably close to that limit, and there will not be a huge uptake. We don't know that yet. We don't know if there is an increased uptake on this with not necessarily on just reactionary enforcement, but proactive enforcement, because this is a very different type of activity. If there is a greater uptake, there will need to be greater enforcement, I think, to ensure that people do it right. And there are a lot of concerns and issues that can arise when this is not done right. It can make for bad neighborhoods. So because we don't know exactly what that would require to enforce, then, to be honest, this should be put forward towards the budget. We should put forward and outline exactly what that cost is going to be, as opposed to just outline requiring a blanket approval. But that's why, to give the respect to the delegates that have come forward, the people that have put forward their voice in saying that this is something that should be allowed within our city, that's why sometimes it's better to just not say no, but be cautious and look at ways where we can get the necessary information, not through presumptions, not through well wishes, but really try it out and see exactly how that transitions out. The motion that Councillor Ioannidis put forward, I want to congratulate him, I think clearly puts that plan forward. It would allow to be inclusive to the greater number of people that put forward their opinion to be allowed to do that and see exactly how the program is managed, how it's enforced, what kind of concerns come up within those neighborhoods where this is taking place. Those that don't cooperate with the bylaw, how do we enforce? How do we regulate? And then, based on that, having a clear information of what greater resources are required for a citywide implementation. That makes greater sense in my mind. I'm not saying this shouldn't be allowed. I'm not saying we should preclude all those that have added their view to this. I'm saying let's do it cautiously. Let's allow it. Let's do it cautiously, but do it in a way that Councillor Ioannidis had put forward. Because of that, I can't support the motion the way it is. I will support the later paragraph that Councillor Ioannidis has. And if this defeats, I will strongly support and encourage others too, that we should allow this, we should go forward with this, but ensuring that we do it cautiously and get the right information so that we get it done right. Too often we put forward bylaws and regret and thinking, you know what, we could have done that better. Rather than amending things down the road, let's get it right the first time. So if this gets defeated, I will strongly support, hopefully, Councillor Ioannidis with the contrary motion that he had earlier.
Councillor Davey.
Thank you. First, again, just reading over this a second time, and I know we do get another kick at this, lucky us, Council, but question to Councillor Ioannidis. I think your intent, there was another part that was cut off here, but I want to make sure on your intent. So existing, people that have existing chicken coops in their backyard, if I understand your intent, they would not have to get the neighbor's consent. Because then they'd have to get rid of the chickens. Is that correct? Okay, so for the record, that is the intention, that people that do have existing, and we'll have to leave it to bylaw staff to figure out how to implement that. Okay, so my comments, it's, like, again, I struggle with this, and I don't for a second doubt the Engage Kitchener results. However, I do have to reconcile the fact that the personal feedback that I got from my residents was much closer to 50-50 than Engage Kitchener had reflected. And I have to reconcile that somehow. And the way I will reconcile it is I think we need to be careful and cautious in how we approach this. As is, typical in situations like this, the people that came before us, we saw the absolutely most responsible chicken owners you would ever see come before us and make presentation. And my concern is about the less responsible owners, and my concern, frankly, is about the animals themselves. And I think that while I will support the entire city, I will also support Councillor Ioannidis's motion here, because I do think that adds a bit of control within each neighborhood. I think when you really sit back and think about the problems that we as council hear and get phone calls about, it's about those neighbors that don't care about their neighbors and the ones that don't maintain their property whatsoever. And if these are the type of people, we want to make sure that, their neighbors have a say and say, you know what, that person doesn't take care of their property at all. The last thing we want is, another 4 or 6 chickens in their backyard. So if there's an issue with this, we can come back and visit it. But I will be supporting, I'm not going to support the addition to 6 at this time, but I will be supporting clauses 1 and 3 in the city as a whole.
Councillor Fernandez.
Thanks. I think the report, the conditions, and the research have all been very well reviewed. And I think that what we're seeing is a real shift in the way people are getting their food. We hear more and more that people want community gardens. They want to be able to buy their food locally. They want to support their farmers markets. And having chickens in your backyard is just one more step in that direction. I really appreciated hearing from the delegations today, and especially from the resident in my ward, where I was able to go and visit her property and see the chickens and see the setup that she has. I know that I have owners of chickens in my ward who are waiting for this bylaw to pass, and ones who are waiting, who don't have chickens, who are also waiting for this bylaw to pass. I have heard from some who have some concerns, but listening to our delegations today and looking at the research that Ms. McNeil and her staff did, I'm comfortable with the fact that we will be able to address that. There are policies that are being set out now that I think will cover the majority of the concerns that have been raised to me. The $50 fee, I think, although it sounds extreme, will, I believe, cover for the most part the inspection and will not cost the taxpayers money. It will keep on top of our chickens and our coops. The setbacks are really important, whether it's 2.5 or 3, because we have neighbors, and we've all seen it, who don't get along. So if you have one neighbor you don't get along with, but you have the right size yard and you really want to do this, you're not going to be able to do it because you've got a neighbor you don't agree with. And so then we're going to start pitting neighbors against each other, which is one thing we've talked about before when it comes to cleaning sidewalks and having backyard fires. So I don't really think that it's a good suggestion to get your neighbors to all agree with it, because there's going to be lots of instances where that's not going to happen. I strongly oppose any idea of a pilot project. You know, maybe Ward 9 and 10 were a bit more vocal than Ward 4 or Ward 5 or any of the other wards, but that doesn't preclude them from having the opportunity to engage in this opportunity to try and maybe have chickens in their backyard. And I know there are people out there who are waiting to do this. And if we just say pilot project in 9 or 10, we're going to get a backlash from another group who are sitting and waiting to be able to do this. So I want to thank Gloria's efforts. I briefly, walked in and out of one of her engagements because I had another evening PIC in the same building, and there were a good number of people who attended. I really appreciate the delegations again that came in and presented their viewpoint, and certainly it's easier for people who are supporting something to come forward. But we've also seen the other side. We've seen a chamber full of people who are against something, whether it's sidewalks or backyard fires, or whatever particular issue that we're dealing with. In this case, we're seeing a strong support from Engage Kitchener, from the number of engagement and community members that Gloria has spoken with, and from our delegations. I would like to see us pass and support the recommendations 1 and 2. I will support both of those. I definitely will not be supporting number 3. We cannot depend on good neighborliness to support somebody who wants a chicken and chickens in their backyard. We have to set some really good, solid parameters that help people understand what's being expected of them.
Councillor Marsh.
Thank you, Chair Schneider. Just want to add that, many of my sentiments have already been expressed, but the concept of having backyard hens is very much in line with allowing our urban area to grow and intensify and remain moving towards a sustainable urban food system rather than just have all of our food trucked in from rural areas. I'm very excited about the fact that this consultation has been thorough. It has been over a year since Council directed staff to begin the consultations, and I really do feel that we are getting it right the first time. I unfortunately won't be able to support the Third Amendment either, because I really do feel that it is giving into the concept that neighbors can be pitted against neighbors, and people's fears about what might happen when the chicken coop happens will be given favor rather than just seeing what happens when you do have chickens. If there are legitimate problems, we already have provisions for that in our bylaw as it's written. We don't ask direct neighbors for permission to have 3 dogs or 10 cats or other things that would be more difficult to live beside than a few chickens. So I encourage Council to support the motion that's before us and the first 2 amendments.
Okay. Can you punch in, please? Go ahead.
In the first clause, I would ask...
Can you get up to your mic so people can hear? There you go.
Sorry. Councillor Marsh, in the first clause, I'd ask for some clarification.
Sure.
It says,
so,
if immediate neighbours consent.
Yeah.
You're arguing against that?
So what I'm saying, thank you. Actually, what I had written before, I added a line in, and it's not as clear as it could be. So to clarify, the first amendment is to add a provision allowing for 2.5 meter setbacks rather than the 3 meters, and then comma, and smaller backyard setbacks if immediate neighbors consent. So in other words, if there was a much smaller setback, such as Councillor Galloway-Selak was concerned about in her ward, that if immediate neighbors were to consent, that could still be possible. Is that more clear? Okay.
Councillor Gazzola.
I have a number of questions. Going back to that, do immediate neighbors have to consent for a 2.5? They don't. They only have to consent for if it's smaller than that. Yeah. On item number 3, what does item number 3 refer to? Does it refer to item 2, item 1, or the main motion? What does it refer to?
Good question. Personally, I think item 3 should be, we shouldn't have any setbacks if you accept item number 3. That's how I look at it.
So it's even overruling the main motion. If you go,
but no, that's how I see it. But
no,
the way it's written here is basically you need permission from your neighbors. So it doesn't matter what you have to have the setbacks though.
So you're saying forget everything else. We can your neighbors to agree. We can go whole hog here. Let's go as long as the neighbors agree.
Yes.
Okay.
Did I? No, I'm not putting any setbacks. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, I guess my comment.
Okay.
I mean, there have been a lot of comments. Generally speaking, I'm supportive of where we're going here. We're staff. I think staff did a lot of work. I think they had a lot of good meetings. I think they've come back with some. In some cases, I found them pretty stiff rules, but I think they've explained it, and I can appreciate that. I don't. And on the other hand, I think as far as public engagement, we talked so much about public engagement. I think we had a good shot at public engagement here, and we heard from a lot of people, and we heard a lot of different comments, and we analyzed them well. It's not perfect, but it's a good start, and it's a lot better than I think we've had on a lot of issues. So I'm totally supportive of where we're going. And then this whole question of trying to pin staff down on whether they're going to need more staff or not, well, that's a tough question to ask when we don't know what number of people are going to uptake on this. And one of the things, almost with all issues, 98% of the people obey the law. We need people, we need the police there, for that 1%, 2%, 3% of people that don't obey the law. But that's the case with everything. I've heard so many responsible people come up and speak up and talk about how they deal with this issue now. I'm confident that going down the road, it will not be a big issue, and yet it will give people who want to do this an opportunity to do it. It will also give people that have problems with it an opportunity to look into things and give them a leg to stand on. So I think we're moving in the right direction, and nothing's chiseled in stone. If something, as we see a year from now, if we need to tweak things, that can be done. You can't do everything perfect the first time. I can remember in management having staff that wanted to do some things perfect every time. So what they ended up doing is they checked it and checked it and checked it before they ever did it. You got to go out and venture out, and I don't even think this is a venture. I think there's been a lot of homework done, and it's something that I do want to mention. I want to see it for across the entire city. You can't just zero in on one or two wards. So I will support the main motion and item 1 here. I'm lukewarm on 4 to 6, but that's not a big enough issue. I will not support item number 3. Maybe we need to take, when we do it, if we can take each one separately.
That's what we're going to do,
okay,
yeah.
And recorded vote.
Recorded vote, yep.
Okay. Thank you.
Councillor Galloway-Seelock.
Yeah.
I just want to be clear on number one, that 2.5 is only referring to the side lot line and the rear lot line abutting aside, the ones that have 3 meters currently. It's just because it says 2.5 and there's another setback that's 1.2 meters. So I just want to make sure that one's staying in place as is. Okay, so that's the intent. I just wanted to be, okay, just wanted to be clear on that before. Basically, I'm supportive of the staff recommendation going forward. I think we need to stay at 4 hens as a starting point and grandfather in anybody who does have 6, and that's a starting point. I think we're going to hear, or this could come back to us in a year or two, and we can look at potentially increasing, but I wouldn't want to see us decreasing at that point of time. So I'd like to stay at the 4 at this point. I am not supportive of clause number 3. I think it's going to make for divisive neighborhoods and neighbors if we need to ask our neighbors to get permission. And I think that's something that we clearly try to avoid. We end up getting pulled into a lot of neighborhood or neighbor disputes in areas that we don't necessarily even control. And I don't think making this regulation is something that's going to be friendly to neighborhoods and neighbors. So unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to support that. Understanding that the clause in number 1 says if immediate neighbors consent. I think when you have a much smaller property and it doesn't fit within the bylaw, I think it gives an opportunity potentially for somebody to be able to put one there, even though the regulations don't permit it. So I think you can understand as a homeowner when you don't fit the criteria and someone says, no, it's a little bit easier to swallow than just asking them outright, hey, can I put in a coop even though I have a 50-foot yard and I have, 110 back and I clearly could put it in, but no, you're not allowed because one neighbor says no. I don't think that that's a standard that we want to get into. And this whole notion, and I'm only commenting on it, I know it's not on the floor right now, but in case, for whatever reason, the main motion doesn't pass and we come to this Ward 9 and 10, 50% of the respondents that registered were from Ward 9 and 10. But that means we're negating everything else, the other 50% of people who took the time to actually input, and 87% of those people, or 88% of those people said they were supportive of. And so I don't agree with a pilot project in 2 wards. And I think it's a far stretch to try and compare it to parking on a boulevard. I think there's different circumstances in different wards that permit different things. And quite frankly, I'd be fine if across the city everybody wanted to park on their boulevard. But it was the rest of you around this table who decided not to allow it in the rest of the city and did support Ward 5 moving forward with that. And I think it's the right solution for Ward 5, but it might not be across the city. This example, I think we have to be fair and equitable across the city and allow for the chickens to be able to reside throughout the entire city. And I think that was, I just too want to echo that staff did a great job in this, and it's extremely overwhelming to see that our engaged Kitchener tool get this many responses. I think it was something that we were optimistic that we could use in order to get engagement, but I think for this being one of the first ones, it's quite overwhelming to see how many respondents that we did get. And I think if I remember your presentation a while ago, with how many you expected, the percentage you expected to actually register, I think this came in a lot higher than that percentage that you ever expected to register. And I think that that's a huge bonus too. So congratulations to all staff in getting this report. A lot of effort and work have been done. So kudos to all of you.
Councillor Yanetsky.
Yes, thank you. It certainly has been an interesting topic with a variety of opinions and comments. A report well done by staff once again on the research. Interesting note that there's been a lot of feedback from the community through the survey, and yet I haven't had one person in my ward who's indicated that they're in support of this particular recommendation. Complaints, well, I think there may be some complaints to this particular process, and if it passes. I don't think there'll be any noise complaints. I mean, chickens plucking won't pass the 65 decibel level to that of rock concerts, so I don't think that'll be an issue. The 5 delegations that spoke earlier, I think did an excellent job in presenting their case, and appreciate hearing their side of the view. I grew up on a farm when I was much younger. My parents owned a farm in the Niagara-on-the-Lake area, and we had chickens. We had lots of chickens. So I grew up with the plucking, the smell, the crap, and everything else. But it certainly did belong on a farm, and it was certainly an experience. I also lived in Toronto, and in our ethnic area where we lived, there were a few neighbors that had chickens in their backyards. And I don't know whether they were legal or not. Probably not. I mean, we're talking many, many years ago. And I thought it was rather interesting, but I also heard people complaining about it. So interesting experience to see that. There were a lot of people who did voice in support of this based on the survey. Interesting to see that. And that goes into a nature that maybe there are a lot of people who want this. And I've heard the arguments about urban chickens and going to that direction. That may be a reasonable argument. However, I still feel that chickens are farm animals. And basically, they belong on a farm. And this is where chickens should be. I mean, sure, you want to have them. There may be pets, as you may say them, but I really don't see them as pets. And I really see them as farm animals. And so in this regard, I will not be supporting this, nor any of the amendments before us, because I think it truly goes against the land uses that we have for urban land uses versus rural land uses. So I will not support this because it's really a farm agricultural use.
Okay, thank you. No other Councillor. Oh, one more in the queue. Okay, Councillor Ioannidis.
I thought I was clicked in. Okay, I've been trying to look at this issue on a bigger scale, and we've come across other concerns that we're having difficult dealing with, and one of the things is dealing with dogs, and then we're having issues with feral cats, and so I think Councillor Singh has every right to be concerned about staffing's concerns when it comes to this, because we have these other issues that we can't even deal with. So, I mean, and now we're just going to add on another animal to the list. May not be as extreme, but again, we can't deal with those. I can't really support the bylaw the recommendation based on those types of facts, but as well, I personally would like to see a pilot project, because to me it makes the most sense. But obviously, I'm not going to get that support. So, I thought when we went through the fire pit process, I think I learned a lot through that fire pit process, and where we had a lot of individuals who were extremely upset with it, and we had a lot of individuals who were for it, and so I still feel we're not solving those issues when it comes to having complaints. And so again, throw in this like full force throughout the city without even implementing a staged process, I think is kind of foolish. But again, I don't have the support. So with that, I won't support any of the recommendations, because I truly believe this should be a pilot project first before we implement. And those are my things. And as far as pitting against neighbors, I don't understand why item 1 doesn't pit against neighbors. It says right there, if immediate neighbors consent. So you're speaking one way and speaking the other way, like it's right there. Okay. I would just like to add some comments as well.
I had a little trepidation going into this because fresh eggs are readily available in our area. We have great farmers markets. We can drive outside the city limits and within 5 minutes see signs for fresh eggs. But I do want to thank staff for excellent research, excellent engagement. Our citizens who did engage, I'm so glad that their engagement wound up in the recommendations. It's found some balance. I want to thank our delegations who came in today, who are passionate about this and shared their thoughts. And I also want to thank council. I'm really proud to be part of this council because there was a lot of differing opinions today. Everyone had a chance to express concerns and ideas, and it was a very healthy debate. So I'm very thankful for that. So let's call this to a vote. Item number 1. Yes, Councillor Gazon.
Only have a week between things being ratified. With this, we have 2 weeks before it's ratified. So people can still let their councillors know where they...
Right. Okay. And we take this item by item. Item 1, and a recorded vote has been called. Item 1. Item 1 on your screen. Okay. Yeah. And those in favor? Opposed? Okay. And that passes. And item 2. Those in favor? And opposed? And item 3. Okay, and those in favor? And opposed? Sorry, question?
Sorry, I just wanted a quick question with regards to staff's understanding with respect to number 2 that we dealt with regards to the 6 hens. If a property currently has 6, are we going to allow them to have 6 until they can naturally, over the course of time, allow it to go to 4? I'm just trying to understand if... Yeah. Well, that's what I may have to do.
Okay. Through the chair, currently nobody's permitted to have chickens, and we don't have a registry of who has 6 chickens or who has 4. So I think we'd have to put something in place that would allow people to register with us and let us know if they have 6 in order to take that into consideration.
All right, I'm just going to leave it as is today and maybe bring something forward at council to look at that issue. Okay.
And now we vote on the main motion. And those in favor? And opposed? And that carries. good? Okay. Thank you. All right, we are going to move on to item 6, the Integrated Stormwater Management Master Plan Implementation Plan. And Mr. Golan will introduce our speaker.
Good afternoon, Chair Schneider and committee members. I'm pleased to be bringing forward this report today. This report, when combined with all the additional documentation located on the Stormwater Utility webpage, is the culmination of over 2 years of work to develop the Integrated Stormwater Management Master Plan Environmental Assessment, which was approved by Council in May and became final in July of this year. Based on Council's direction in May, staff have worked with our consultant, Aquifer Beach, to develop an implementation plan with an associated budget and schedule consistent with the corporate 10-year capital forecast, as well as supporting policy to replace existing outdated council policies related to stormwater management. This new approach to be taken in the City of Kitchener has been developed with extensive consultation with internal, community, and industry stakeholders. At this point, I would like to introduce Chris Denick from Aquifer Beach to go through a brief presentation of the material.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. Presentation today, fairly brief, 10 minutes. We're going to talk very briefly about the study purpose, the process that was undertaken, a quick overview of the Integrated Stormwater Management Master Plan, particularly the goals and objectives and the priority sub-watersheds which tie into the implementation plan, the purpose of that plan, the budget and schedule, as well as the supporting policy development. In terms of the study process, as Mr. Golan mentioned, the report was finished in May 2016. 30-day public review was completed on July 10th, 2016. Following that, the implementation plan was developed, and we are here presenting that implementation plan today to Council. The Integrated Stormwater Management Master Plan, the purpose of this master plan is to mitigate flooding and erosion, improve water quality, and serve as the decision support tool as well as the methodology for the prioritization of work. So distilled down, that is really the intent of the study itself. We have talked about the goals and objectives before, but the Integrated Stormwater Management Master Plan aims to maintain the natural hydrologic cycle of the City of Kitchener and the watersheds to minimize the risk of flooding and erosion, as well as minimize pollution entering our drinking water sources as well as the natural environment. So conceptually in the master plan as well as the implementation plan, we have followed through this thinking. The urban runoff goes to different sources, including infiltrates in the groundwater as well as enters the Grand River. Both of these for the City of Kitchener and the region of Waterloo are sources of drinking water. The waste products from our use of that water is then treated and then discharged back into the Grand River. So this holistic cycle continues over and over again, and the master plan as well as the implementation plan recognizes this. And the policy developed to support this is founded upon this idea of this holistic approach and the cycle of water in the City of Kitchener and the region of Waterloo. So we develop goals and objectives for water quality, water quantity, erosion control, the natural environment, water resources in general, infrastructure within the City of Kitchener relating to stormwater. We also develop goals and objectives in the master plan for both policy and implementation, as well as the community at large as part of the study. So just to refresh memories, there are 6 stormwater management program elements that were put forward in the recommended approaches in the master plan document. Municipal pollution prevention, operation and maintenance practices, market-based strategies for private property, and this is on the individual lots or source controls. Stormwater for the Capital Roads program, which is conveyance controls, the stormwater management facilities, watercourse and erosion restoration, and finally urban flood management and stormwater infrastructure. In terms of the implementation plan and the master plan, we also did a sub-watershed prioritization. The prioritization ranks from 1 being the highest priority to 4 the lowest priority. This figure here shows the priority sub-watersheds in the City of Kitchener, and the priority 1 being the ones that are in the most need are Upper Schneider, Montgomery, Shoemaker, Sandrock, and Voisins Creek. So at a comprehensive level, scoring both water quality, infrastructure, stormwater management, terrestrial features, all in a consolidated fashion, which is detailed in the master plan. We see priority 1 watersheds all the way down to priority 4, meaning they are in the best condition in the city of Kitchener. And the prioritization is the foundation of the implementation plan. So the implementation plan was developed in order to prioritize all the works based on the priorities of watersheds and where opportunities to improve those conditions through the elements of the recommended approach exist. Recommend funding allocations and develop an implementation schedule using existing funding sources. And finally, to develop supporting policies to support the first 2. We have developed an implementation budget and schedule. The schedule and associated costs have been distributed over the 14-year implementation period in order to manage staff and equipment requirements as part of the implementation of the Integrated Stormwater Management Master Plan, to build municipal capacity, in this case 2 new full-time positions to make current contract positions permanent. We want to align with other municipal projects and programs in place, and as well ensure that the projects can be delivered within existing funding forecasts. The master plan itself, as well as the implementation plan, is pinned upon the priorities of watersheds, as well as we are looking for efficiencies across divisions. So because stormwater does not just end with the stormwater group, and so you see a lot of integration through the implementation plan and the master plan itself. We have 3 implementation periods in the schedule. We have the immediate term priorities, which are 2017 to 21, the medium term, as well as long-term implementation priorities. These are laid out in the figure. If you please refer to your staff report, you'll see how this has been distributed based on the costs that were estimated in the master plan document itself, and we have aligned them with the city programs. The implementation schedule and budget corresponds to the 10-year corporate capital forecast for the city of Kitchener, and we also have deferred priorities. So beyond 2030, these are elements of the master plan that cannot be delivered within the existing funding forecasts. So we do have $40 million that was estimated in the Stormwater Management Master Plan for the replacement of undercapacity storm trunk sewers that is deferred beyond the 3 implementation periods that you see there. In regards to policy, the Integrated Stormwater Management Master Plan will replace I-1135, I-1140, and I-1445 with a new policy. So we have 1 new policy called Stormwater Management. This has 3 specific components, which I'll be detailing next. It includes the stormwater infiltration in the context of source protection planning. I'll describe that. The stormwater volume criteria and targets, as well as the stormwater management fee, which was formerly the cash and lieu program. The stormwater infiltration in the context of source protection planning, we'll just call it the infiltration at the moment, is effective January 1st, 2017. It is developed in consultation with the Region of Waterloo and the Ministry of the Environment and Climate Change. This document has been out in draft, substantially unchanged for over a year through the implementation, through the development of the master plan process. This essentially governs how and where stormwater can be infiltrated to manage the risk per the source protection plans. So this is a risk-based policy developed in consultation with our stakeholders and partners that defines for everyone in the City of Kitchener where infiltration can and cannot occur safely within the city. It focuses on the retrofit opportunities and or redevelopment of land within the built-up areas, primarily because new land development will be required to go through the planning process, which will set and detail the risks and opportunities and constraints within that new development area. So this focuses primarily on retrofit opportunities. And this will be superseded by sub-watershed studies, master drainage plans, secondary plans, or other planning studies as relevant in the context. But this sets a general framework for how this can happen. In terms of some detail, it is really designed to protect the groundwater resources from contamination and puts constraints on infiltration best practices. So we have put constraints. They may be full prohibitions and or requirements for what we'll call issue contributing areas. These are areas of the city where wellheads have been identified that have risks in the city of Kitchener, in this case chlorides being the predominant one and nitrates being smaller but an area as well. We also have some wellhead protection areas with a vulnerability score greater than 8. and wellhead protection areas, vulnerability score 2 to 6 inclusive. These are designations through the Source Protection Plan in the City of Kitchener, and these are varying levels of constraint and opportunity. We have also required, put a comprehensive list forward for high-risk sites. And these will be required to complete a pollution prevention plan and a risk management plan. And essentially is a red flag for these activities on sites that pose a higher risk. So the mapping provided looks something like this. We have the constraint areas identified, the issue contributor areas you see in the green hatch in the center, and then as well we have all the other constraint areas identified. We have developed very simple tables with the region of Waterloo and our partners in developing this, and it allows the user to look up geographically where they are in the city, identify the risks and opportunities, as well as it provides recommended practices in those areas. So it's a very straightforward policy to apply and is available through GIS mapping. We can locate individual properties and assess how infiltration of stormwater can safely occur. The second element is the stormwater volume criteria and targets. Developed in consultation again with the region of Waterloo and the Grand River Conservation Authority, who are on the stakeholder group. It is effective January 1st, 2017. This governs stormwater management targets in the City of Kitchener. It has a retention target of 12.5 millimeters, so the sites will be required to retain 12.5 millimeters. We also have targets for water quality, water quantity, and direct discharges to water courses, as well as we discussed the downtown exemption area, which will remain. A little more detail, it includes a minimum of 12.5 millimeter stormwater volume criteria. It also has general stormwater targets for implementation as part of the Integrated Stormwater Management Master Plan, as part of new development, redevelopments, reurbanization, residential intensification, as well as linear projects. It is a companion document and needs to be read in conjunction, obviously, with the stormwater infiltration policy document, which dictates how we can do this safely. Just a reminder, going forward, where this came from the master plan, we do have 75% of the urban areas that do not have stormwater management to control flooding and water quality. So this came out of an extensive investigation in terms of what an appropriate target would be, and is detailed in the master plan to address this and other concerns identified. So to sum up the criteria and targets very simply, key elements include the City of Kitchener will continue to require the control of off-site runoff and flood control for erosion and for flood control and erosion as previously. Continue to achieve infiltration targets to maintain existing water balance per the relevant studies that exist within the city. We will be requiring all proponents to control for water quality, pollutant loadings in accordance with the current Ministry of the Environment and Climate Change guidelines to enhance level protection, or level 1. We will be requiring the retention of 12.5 millimeters of runoff from all surfaces of the entire site. That requirement also extends that they will be required to enroll in the City of Kitchener Stormwater Credit Program for tracking and verification purposes. And in this case, to be clear, retention, we are focusing on a combination of both infiltration, evapotranspiration, and rainwater reuse. So a lot of things can be grouped into that retention target. And this will be superseded. These are minimum targets, so they're superseded by more stringent targets as developed by the MOECC and or existing or future subwatershed studies, master plans, or EISs or other agency policies. So this is a minimum requirement being put forward to raise the bar of stormwater management in the City of Kitchener in compliance with the master plan approaches. So to be clear, it is an interim volume target of 12.5 millimeters. I'll explain why interim in a minute. The volume retention contributes to water quality control, quantity control, erosion control, water balance, and protection of natural features. Simply said, we're not double counting. So we will require the retention. That retention will count towards other objectives because we have heard that double counting is not appropriate, and we acknowledge that these things work, and therefore if the proponent can demonstrate that they've achieved that target, they will get credit for that achievement in terms of stormwater management going forward. The stormwater management fee, which is the third element, applies when the stormwater targets cannot be fully achieved. So very similar to the cash in lieu, we have now amended it to comply with the current approach. Why is it an interim target? I do want to give you some rationale on the provincial direction. Back in February 2015, the Ministry of the Environment put out an interpretation bulletin regarding the expectations in terms of stormwater management. The highlights of this interpretation bulletin, I'll summarize here. The hydrologic cycle should be maintained to the greatest extent possible. Too often, the Ministry of Environment says that too often the preservation of the natural hydrologic cycle is not sufficiently addressed in stormwater management plans submitted to the Ministry for approval. That low impact development is relevant for all forms of development, including urban intensification and retrofit. LIDs can be less costly than conventional stormwater practices. And finally, that going forward, the Ministry expects that stormwater management plans will reflect the findings of watershed, subwatershed, and environmental management plans, and will employ low-impact development in order to maintain the natural hydrologic cycle to the greatest extent possible. So definitively, the Ministry of the Environment is saying that this is the expectation going forward. This interpretation bulletin was immediately prior to the release of the terms of reference for the Ministry of the Environment Low-Impact Development Stormwater Guideline document, which is currently being prepared by ourselves. Volume control requirements for Ontario will be a requirement as part of this document. It will detail how to model these systems, what the criteria for groundwater protection will be, climate change processes, and will be linked to other manuals developed in consultation with other agencies and generally funded by the Ministry of the Environment. So the policy rationale here overall is to align with the pending MOECC Stormwater Management Guidance Manual, which is anticipated for release in 2017. We want to align with approved source protection planning policy under the Clean Water Act. And really this fundamentally ensures that costly study updates are avoided and that the city as well as the development industry stays ahead of future development approval requirements. So we've been proactive. It's a 15-year plan. We want to ensure that what we are creating now will be valid going forward. And with that, I'm happy to take questions. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Denning. We do have questions for you, starting with Councillor Singh.
Yeah, thank you. And it's a pretty in-depth report, and I like the way the direction we're heading. Obviously, these are controls that are lacking and need to be implemented. There are some added fees that are, I guess, proposed as part of this consideration. I'm seeing C, stormwater management fee. What's the difference between this and the cash in lieu?
Okay.
Through the chair, it's the same fee. So the cash in lieu is being abandoned, and this fee is replacing it. The amount is the same, and the way it's applied, cash in lieu is only applied for water quality. This will be applied for water quality and quantity, since we have the quantity target in place or identified.
But the fee stays the same. It would have to be paid regardless, because in most developments you would still need, for water quality, it would be applicable no matter what, correct?
Oh, through the chair, the idea would be if they meet our requirements for water quantity control and quality
Such as,
control.
if you can quickly.
So if they have a stormwater pond on their site that does everything, they don't pay the fee.
They don't pay the fee, okay. Otherwise, they would pay cash in lieu.
Right.
And in this case, even if so, would that mean that they don't need to have a stormwater management pond then?
No, the intention is that they would need to control everything on site to the maximum extent possible. And there's a checklist that our development engineering group will go through with them to confirm that they have they've exhausted all options. There are sites where there will be constraints. We recognize that. So bedrock or clay, in our case here, contamination on site. These are all constraints that would prevent them from meeting the volume retention target of 12.5 millimeters and the water quality criteria. So in those justified cases, we would go to the stormwater management fee in lieu of them doing the work on the site.
Just for clarity, but if they do the work, on site, there would be no stormwater management fee then.
That is correct.
I see. Okay. All right.
Okay. Councillor Fernandez.
Thank you. And this is kind of what this has all been leading up to, all the studies that you've been doing and that good, big, huge research. The only one thing I do request is if we can put it up, please, is the chart, the implementation schedule and budget. because it was
The next slide, but I'm locked
too
out.
small to read.
Just one slide forward, please. Yeah. Oh.
That's okay. Well, while
locked
she's
out.
doing that, you know, when we approved the master plan, there was a number of questions around, you know, what are the costs, and so now we're unpeeling that onion, so to speak, and we're seeing that some of the costs are talking about 2 FTEs. My original understanding is that the everything was to be borne out of the original budget that was going to be coming out of the stormwater fee program. Is that still the case?
Through the chair, yes, we aren't increasing the rates to accommodate this. The costs for those additional staff are borne within the capital budget, so they're absorbed in the project costs.
Okay. This is still really hard to read, gentlemen. I'm sorry, but I think it's important for us to understand where some of this implementation is going to be happening. I'll carry on with a couple of my other questions. When you were talking about priorities, and I noticed, of course, that in my ward, in my area, Blair Creek and Strasbourg's, the south portion, and anything that's feeding into Roseville Swamp is considered of lower priority. Help me understand that. I mean, I recognize that there are areas, you know, around Lakeside Park and those areas that are in really bad condition. We want to fix that. But this is still fairly pristine. Would we not want to start measures immediately to protect the pristineness of these areas?
Through the chair, the prioritization goes from 1 to 4, and what we have focused on in the implementation plan is prioritizing the opportunities in the areas of most need. But that doesn't say that we've forgotten about areas that are priority 4. They may not. They may have identified projects within them. They may not. In general, if we look at the geographic distribution of those priority watersheds, it is not surprising that the newer development areas are generally in better condition. They were generally planned and built to a higher standard. The Upper Blair watershed being the example that you brought up, has a very stringent requirement in terms of water balance, infiltration, water quality, erosion control, which would far exceed what would be required in older areas of the city. The Priority 1 watersheds, of course, generally align with areas of the city where they were built prior to stormwater management. So the intent is to continue to monitor and do all the things that we're currently doing that are good in Priority 4 watersheds, and so to maintain those in its current condition, whereas the Priority 1 would be the areas where we would selectively and prioritize, they'd be higher up on when we do a project. So the schedule that you see here has identified project opportunities in those priority watersheds to try and make up that disparity or that gap in stormwater management in those areas. The monitoring program and all the other programs, the improvement erosion sediment control recommendations will continue to be in effect as part of the master plan and will help and continue to maintain those priority 4 subwatersheds or our most pristine subwatersheds in the city.
Okay, I'm glad you're reassuring me of that, because I don't want us to do the work on areas that need to be cleaned up because they didn't have stormwater management, but then to see in 5 years from now that the other areas have not had the oversight that they need to have, and now we have to tackle them as well, because if we don't protect them, we're going to be in another situation where we're going to have to do work in them, right?
Through the chair, we have split these up as both projects and programs. Individual projects were identified through the master plan. Those have been prioritized in the priorities of watersheds. But we also have a series of programs, which would include maintenance, inspection. All those will continue to be enforced, street sweeping, all these things that were in part of the master plan will continue and in some cases be amended. And those are not geographically necessarily focused. So they will, some of those will cover the entire city, including the priority 4 subwatersheds.
Okay. When we're talking about on page 6-5, spill prevention and management, do we work with our hazmat team in our fire department with that kind of stuff, or is this just through our own staff? How do we identify the risks, and when there is a spill, how do we work through that process to get that cleaned up?
Through the chair, I will first speak about the master plan and how we've dealt with the spills and pollution prevention. There is now a comprehensive list as part of both the policy documents that we just discussed, the infiltration as well as the targets that speak to high-risk activities. And those high-risk activities necessarily don't correspond to land use. They are generally industrial, but not necessarily. But they are very detailed, everything down to the manufacturing of paints, metal treating, all the way down to airports, dry cleaners, that serve as a flag, as the risks for groundwater and the risks to stormwater. All of those properties through the policies will be required to do a pollution prevention plan or a salt management plan, or risk management plan, per the region policies. This will include, as part of the pollution prevention plans, will include spills responses. So those high-risk sites will be required to have a in-place spills response for that property based on the materials that they have on site that are deemed to be risky.
Okay, that's good. You said something about double counting. Can you help us understand that a little bit better?
Sure. Through the chair, the approach in stormwater has been the realization that stormwater volume is also a pollutant. So previously we thought about pollutants as being heavy metals and nutrients. It has come to the realization by many through years of study that is the actual volume that can also be a problem. So we could take distilled water and dump this into a water course with the same volumes that we are currently doing in terms of stormwater management, and it would significantly degrade the environment because of that increased volume. So we've realized that in the master plan. We've looked at and analyzed the requirements. So we have put a 12.5 millimeter volume retention target. This will be retained on site and will not be allowed to be released as runoff. By removing that volume, we are achieving multiple objectives. But we also realize that when you remove volume, you have additional benefits. If I remove that volume, I get additional water quality control by removing that. I get flood control. I get some erosion control. I may also be meeting my infiltration or water balance requirements. So we're not saying retain this and do everything you're doing. We're acknowledging the science and saying we want you to retain this, but we will count it towards these other objectives in stormwater that we always design to as being a positive thing. And so we are not going to be double counting. We're not asking for 12.5 millimeters plus the water quality. We're saying this counts towards those things.
Okay. All right, I know I'm out of time, but I'm going to queue back in. I have more questions.
Thank you. Councillor Yonetsky.
Yeah, thank you. The chart that we have on the screen there, could we get an enlarged version of it to circulate to all of us, like an 11 by 17 size? Because I found it extremely difficult to read. My eyesight is not bad, but it's not eagle-eyes.
The implementation plan executive summary, as well as the document, has 11 by 17s. I believe it's the 5th page in the executive summary, but I'm sure that we can have that.
It's in here, but I found it very
hard. In the actual implementation plan itself, there is a large size version of that.
Okay. Yeah. All right, we'd appreciate that. On page 6.8, and this is more to Mr. Golan. He was indicating that there would be no increase in the stormwater management rate based on this particular program, based on the assumption that the increase of annual 9.2% would be maintained for 10 years. So if that continues on, I can appreciate there'll be no further increase. However, this particular plan is a 14 or 15-year plan. What's going to happen after 10 years in terms of that 9.2% increase? Did that come down to zero, or is that going to escalate to a higher fee, or what's happening? Doesn't seem to address that. We're only dealing with a 10-year budget, but you're looking at a 15-year outlook.
Yeah, through the chair, did we assume the 9.2 through 2030?
No, just for the first 10 years, and then after that, it's
so
flat lines.
Yeah, the projection that we've put together, it's assuming the 9.2% for 10 years, and then not after that. And of course, if there's any changes in between, cognizant of the fact the budget is approved on an annual basis, then things get shuffled around. But this is the best projection that we could put forward with the information that we have at the time.
So really, from the 10th year to the 15th year, you don't know what's going to happen? Is that what you're telling me?
As far as rate increases,
Yeah.
that's correct.
Okay.
So through the chair, the implementation priorities that we set out, the 1, 2, 3, priority 1, 2, 3, correspond to the accuracy as well as to what we can reasonably forecast going forward.
And I can appreciate that, yeah. And once you get down that far in the future, it's hard to know where you'll stand financially, sort of thing. In the chart that you had, the map actually, where you had the drainage sheds, and you said certain areas are much more prone to needing to be addressed immediately. And I noticed the Voisin watershed as one of the examples, as well as the Sandrock, and I think a few others that you mentioned. And I'm just thinking that the program that you have in terms of stormwater management intent to do certain things to control it, that area in my ward is already developed almost 100%, as opposed to outlying greener pasture areas. So in my area, I'm not too sure how much more you can do. I don't have any stormwater management ponds in my area. We do have greenway systems that flood during higher intensity storms, 10-year storm, 25-year storm, and that's happened this past summer. And I know I've talked to Hans Gross and Nick about this. So I'm just wondering how you can mitigate and try to control future storms, or we will still have flooding, even though you try to implement stuff downstream, or upstream, I should say.
Through the chair, the approach in the master plan has individual projects. We did look at areas where ponds could be retrofitted in. The reality is we found 12 in the city of Kitchener, 12 areas where it was possible. Those are detailed in the master plan. The difference between this master plan and, say, ones previous is that we've also focused on decentralized controls. So what we have in the existing City of Kitchener program through rebates, credits as part of the credit policy, where individuals do things on their own properties, these have significant effect on flooding and erosion water quality downstream. So we have a program set up to further incentivize people and businesses to do things on their own properties. As part of the Capital Roads program, where we have identified opportunities, Capital Roads have been identified through the master plan to integrate stormwater controls as part of that program. So we have a line item in this table for what we call LID-ARP, which is the increase in budget allocation to build LID controls or low impact development controls as part of roads projects. We are looking at trails, we are looking at parts planning, so it is a multifaceted process. And the ministry's focus and other agencies' focus on stormwater control of this nature is to get the volume out of the system and to look at surfaces that can behave in multiple ways. A sidewalk that is regular concrete will create runoff and cause flooding. A permeable concrete sidewalk will absorb stormwater and reduce flooding. So we have integrated these elements in the master plan so that where we don't have areas in the city where we have large blocks of land to build infrastructure, we can do these decentralized controls to bring down those volumes. And the realization is that land comes up for redevelopment and intensification on a very long time frame. So as these things come up, we will then, they will also be required to implement stormwater controls as part of redevelopments and urbanization.
Okay, and I appreciate where you're coming from, and I think those are good directions to go to try to reduce it as much as possible. I do have another question, but I guess my time is up.
And Mr. Gross has some further information for you. So if you could buzz back in after. Okay.
Through the chair, I just wanted to comment on the on the budgeting and on the fee and on the rate, the utility rate. The program that you see here is being funded from the piece of the storm utility that is capital, which is charged or forwarded to other projects. So within the utility, and if you turn to page 6.8 of the report, it shows you the expenditures, the income and the expenditures that we have within the utility. And the piece that funds this master plan is a very small piece of that. And this is why we've had to look very carefully at where we are spending the money from a prioritization point of view and from an investment point of view. There are many areas of the city, yours included, your ward included, where we're not going to be able to do a whole lot of work right away. This is why we've prioritized the work based on quality and quantity. And I just wanted to be very clear that the amount of funding that's available for the program is a small piece of the utility.
Thank you. Councillor Gazzola.
Yeah, actually, that leads. I'm really confused on some of this. Okay, and let me go back first. On May the 30th, we dealt with this. What did we approve then?
Through the chair, on May 30th, Council approved the environmental assessment, Schedule B environmental assessment, which outlined the overall approaches for the master plan.
And the cost.
So we didn't approve the master plan then?
The master plan was approved then, and staff received direction to develop an implementation plan, which is what is before you now.
Okay, so as we speak now, as a result of this implementation, what impact does this have on our operating budget? What's it doing to our operating budget over the next 5 years?
Through the chair, Justin over here. Through the chair, this has no impact on the projected rate increases around the stormwater utility. So what was presented to council last year, we're working within that envelope as we develop the implementation plan. So we're not looking at increasing or decreasing from that.
Okay, so as a result of this approving the master plan, we're not changing anything there. The second part of it is we did have a capital forecast, a 10-year capital forecast. Now, how is that changed as a result of this? Or are the amounts the same?
Through the chair, the capital program, which is the transfer to capital AIRP, has not changed. That's the capital program that we're bringing to you as part of the capital budget.
Okay, as part of the 2017 capital budget?
Correct. 2017 and onward.
Yeah, did that change? Has that changed anything from what was there last year? There should only be 1 year that changes.
Through the chair, the transfer to capital AIRP is dependent on the accelerated infrastructure projects.
Okay, but it hasn't changed from where we're going.
It does not.
Okay, my time's running out here. Is it possible, you talk about 40 million beyond 2030, is it possible to get a list of that kind of stuff, just so we have it?
It is possible. It is detailed in the master plan as to those locations.
It is?
It is.
Okay.
It is in the original EA document.
Okay, so it's all there. The looking at that schedule, the detail, I had to blow it up so I could read it. There are a couple of things. I look in 2030, and it says Cameron Heights Pool, $13 million. Let's say we're building a new swimming pool out of this fund?
It is the name of the park. It's the location. Cameron Heights Community Center. There's a large subsurface stormwater facility plan for there.
It's not the pool. Now, the other thing I wanted to, there was, over the 10-year period, there's over $4 million that's being spent on market-based strategy. What is that? In 20 seconds, what is all that
Through
about?
the chair, this is the next step in the stormwater credit program. This is how we get individual property owners to increase the amount of stormwater they're controlling at their own property. We are doing this because it is the most cost-effective means of stormwater management currently available to the city. It is pennies on the dollar for every dollar we spend that we get back in terms of stormwater control.
So that hasn't changed from where we were? So it was
no
there
impact on the
basically
budget.
before. Okay, just one final thing on 6.8. I tried to follow this, where this is sort of a typical year. Well, it's 2017, and you have $6 million going out, and then you've got a negative 3 million, and then you've got two other amounts that add up to that 3 million. I'm not clear on that, what it is. Everybody else clear? They are all...
Through the chair, I put this table together to demonstrate this is exactly in line with the operating budget, the forecast that you're going to see. I think it's next week. What I've done here is under the expenses, what you'll see in the budget package is transfer to capital, AIRP, and then transfer to capital other. So that other line item is 3.8 million. And all that I've done here is split that apart to demonstrate what portion of that 3.8 million is going to fund this implementation plan, which is before you right now, which is 2.5 million in 2017, and then the other where the other capital money is transferred to, which is other corporate initiatives such as SAP, and that's the 1.2 million. So it's really out of the $16 million or 16,594,000 in 2017. 2.5 million of that is going to fund the implementation plan.
This is the implementation plan right here.
Right.
What is in there over the 15-year period, 14-year period? What does it add up to?
Yeah, approximately 75 million.
And so you're transferring 22.5 million. How do you get that 75 million?
So that's just in year one. That's in 2017.
Yeah. But it's 75 million.
Yeah. And this is why you'll see in the, I encourage to look at this as a schedule as much as a budget. We have obviously prioritized on some watersheds. We've also moved projects around based on need, available budget, as well as cognizant of the time frame to implement programs. So certain projects may take a year to design and then tender and construct, so things have been spread out. We've also prioritized certain projects that have been completed through other EAs that are on the shelf and ready to go. So we have moved projects around to fit the budgetary requirements per our previous commitment to Council on May 30th.
Well, I get confused.
Councillor Gillon, I'm just going to ask you to queue back in. We have some more councillors in the queue. So, Councillor Davey.
Thank you. I just wanted clarification on the, and I don't realize we're going to be dealing with budget soon, but so the I want to make sure I understand. The 9.2% increase over the next 10 years will pay for the stormwater, like for the entire implementation program over the next 14? So there's no budgeted increase at this time after the 10-year period?
So through the chair, the 9.2% has been carried for only the 10 years forward, after which point we've just, essentially there is no increase in the rate because there's not been forecasted that way. So 9.2 over the 10 years, the additional funds that are forecasted to come in the subsequent years are detailed here. So we're assuming funds will continue to come in through the utility that can then be reallocated out. But we have not kept a 9.2% increase beyond the specified 10 years.
Okay, so at the risk of getting into budget discussions, then I guess I'd ask, this might be a question, Mr. Chapman, why wouldn't we spread out that increase, since it's so dramatic, over the 14-year period, and which would bring it down to probably 6 or 7% instead of the 9.2?
Through the chair, just in addition to that, you'll see that there's a net revenue at the end of 2017, and we're forecasting additional revenues in future years to help build up our reserves.
Okay, I can park it for the moment. We can bring it back at budget time, but I think it's something we should look at.
Okay, Councillor Fernandez.
Thanks. So we've got a lot of budget question happening, but I'm going to go back to the, the meat and potatoes here and the water. You were talking about volume targets, and you were talking about 11 millimeters holding.
12.5, right? But yes.
Sorry, 12.5. Sorry, I'll put that in here. What are there other volume targets that you're talking about as well? I sort of got a sense that there were, when I was looking through it, that there were other volume targets and in your presentation.
No, through the chair, there is only one volume retention target at 12.5 millimeters for the site. As I said, that will be counted towards the other objectives of water quality, erosion, etc. This is that interim target has been put in place cognizant that the Ministry of the Environment will be coming out with a much more stringent requirement for the entire province in 2017. So this aligns all of the policy and all of the implementation plan, with the only requirement being that when the ministry comes out with their number, that there's just a minor addition to the change in that volume number, 12.5 to what have you. The ministry is currently forecasting for this area anywhere between 27 and 28 millimeters.
Okay.
So significantly more.
Yeah. When will this implementation and storm infiltration limits be effective?
January 1st, 2017.
Oh, okay, you did say that, sorry. And is this going to be applicable to anything that's on the docket now, as in terms of subdivision applications, redevelopment? So it becomes effective January 17. Yeah. So anything that's coming in February or even now that's sort of halfway improved, are these going to be a part of that implementation?
What we've informed the development industry is that if they have approval in principle for a site plan, then the old standards will apply as of January 1st, or draft plan approval for a subdivision. But if they don't, then the new standards would apply.
Okay, so are we seeing a flood of applications trying to be pushed forward right now? Because some of these are going to be stringent requirements.
To be determined.
Okay. That was a very political answer.
Yeah, through the chair, we did have a consultation with the developers and engineers, consultants in the area about these targets. In general, I think most of them were not surprised as they are tuned into what the ministry is proposing. Most of them are currently doing some sort of low-impact development, volume retention on site regardless. We are just setting that minimum bar.
Okay. So when would we see the improvements in some of our streams and creeks? I mean, some of it's going to be a lot longer term, especially where there's a lot more hard service. But some of our creeks originate, further north and then flow through the city and then flow further into, the Grand, for example.
Right.
When will we see some of that improve?
Through the chair, there is a monitoring plan developed to help understand that. There will be localized improvements immediately with some of these projects as they're implemented. Because it is a distributed program across the city, we expect to see improvements or at least maintaining the current condition almost immediately, but recognizing it as a 15 or 14-year plan as we go forward. It took, 1916, the city of Kitchener was established. It's taken us a long time to get to this condition. It will realistically take us a long time to get out. But we have to hit the windows of opportunities when they come up. And that's what this plan really focuses on, is how do we get those opportunities and make the best use of them as they come up for redevelopment. So if we see more redevelopments, which we can't forecast, they'll be required to do these things. We will see an improvement of stormwater control in those watersheds where we currently have nothing.
Okay, so you're talking about applications for developments or redevelopment where the improvements will have to happen. But what about, like when I see on this chart, sediment removal, I'm assuming that's going to be coming out of stormwater management ponds. Are we going to be moving in a systematic way? I mean, yeah, you've prioritized them, right? So it's not going to be something over here and over here and over here. We're going to try to move in a systematic way so that the water quality will improve as it flows through those areas.
Through the chair. So there are legislative requirements. The City of Kitchener currently has obligations to maintain stormwater infrastructure, stormwater ponds, oil and grit separators that have to be done on a regular basis. Those have been prioritized based on need because they are a legislative requirement. So those have been prioritized in themselves as the ones in the most need of sediment removal. And we do have a systematic program going forward that the city staff will be implementing to continue to maintain the stormwater ponds and the oil and grit separators going forward. It's a comprehensive plan to ensure that happens.
Okay, one last question. 2017, 2018, 2019, you've got some oil grit separator units and sediment removal, 8. 128,000. The next one is same number, but only 68,000, and then the same number, no number, a study for 50,000. Why is there a difference? Like there's almost double difference in price here between 2017 and 2018.
Through the chair, City Kitchener, previous to the master plan, did a study on some existing oil and grit separators based on priority. Obviously, the size of these units change, so the cost, so the amount of sediment that they can hold changes. So we may have 8 units, 8 large units versus 8 small units, etc. The detailed study was limited to a certain number. So as part of the program, we are then initiating a study to reprioritize the remaining oil and grit separators. And really the intent here is we do not want to be mobilizing any city forces or outside forces to maintain anything that doesn't need to be maintained, but we do want to prioritize infrastructure that is in need. So that study will then reprioritize the remaining OGS units in the city and develop a very similar program as to how they're implemented and cleaned out. And we've allocated budget to ensure that we can continue to do that per the legislative requirements.
Great. Thank you very much.
Councillor Singh.
Yeah, thank you. Councillor Davey kind of touched on this, just on the proposed increase to the utility by 9% ongoing for the 10-year period. I appreciate that. Obviously, this can be discussed as part of budget as well, but now is a better opportunity because we see the program before us. Mm-hmm. So did we do different modeling as well based on a reduced increase and what that would mean based on the master plan and what we could achieve in getting done?
Through the chair, if the projects that you see here do not come forward, what will happen is you will have more deferred projects past 2030. So these projects will get moved out further into the implementation schedule, and you will be deferring more projects, is the simple answer.
No, well, the answer that I got was we're doing it based on a 10-year program on the increased compounding because we want to build up a reserve. But the program is outlined based on a 14-year cycle. Correct. So, again, can the work not be phased for the full 14 years so that we don't have to have increases as significant as the 9% proposed?
Through the chair, I just want to clarify the 9.2% increase came as part of the State of the Infrastructure report that identified the increases needed for sanitary water and stormwater. And that increase is primarily going to fund the AIRP program. So if we're reducing that 9.2%, we need to look at all of the utilities and the work being funded for AIRP.
So let me get that clear again, and that's why I wanted to make sure we ask this because we have the right people before us, as opposed to kind of delaying this as part of budget discussion. I'll just run it off, the 9% increase is not necessarily for what's outlined in the master plan, stormwater management master plan. It's the AIRP. Okay, all right. Thank you.
Councillor Yanetsky.
Yeah, I didn't finish asking my last question to you, gentlemen. Last week I had a tour or a walk with Mr. Nolan and Dan Locke through the Voisin Greenway system and the Voisin channel for stormwater management runoff that runs from upstream and through over to eventually to Schneider Creek. And I know there's been flooding from that greenway system into the backyards and homes this past summer from high-intensity storms. Looking at this program here, will any of this be addressing flooding issues and improvement to the greenway portion of the channel at all, or is that under a totally different program? I don't know. Help me out here.
Sure. Through the chair, I know it's difficult to read, so apologies for that. But in 2020, under the Watercourse Improvement Program, we do have a reach in the Voisin Creek, I'll call it, identified for restoration. Now the reach that is identified is a little bit further downstream from where we were walking last week and looking at it. And the way that's been prioritized is because we've got that the bag walls have actually already fallen down and the banks are eroding towards Greenbrook, and so there's a threat to the sidewalk caving in and that sort of stuff happening. So it's a higher priority versus those areas where we saw some spilling, some of the flooding where we walked.
Through the chair, if I may just further on that, there is a difference between the operational activities and the master plan activities. The operational activities relate to maintenance of water courses, etc. And that's where the 2% annual increase comes in. We are getting together, I believe, next week to work out the priorities for the operational pieces based on this master plan, based on the priorities, so that we can address some of those areas that in fact are flooding. Why are they flooding? Maybe there needs to be more clean out of debris or branches or trees. So the operational maintenance piece is separate from this implementation plan piece. It's a separate budget item, and it's a separate budget item within the utility, so that those two are going to be separated.
Okay, and that's where I was confused on, because you talk about maintenance here in the report to some degree of the sewer systems, but and the chart didn't really go into full detail. So that's why I wanted a clarification. Maybe we can sit down and talk about that off another time to get into those real details. Okay, thank you.
And Councillor Gazzola.
Okay, I want to go back to that schedule on 6-8, and I'm trying to understand where we're going down the road. Down the road, we've got a 14-year plan here, right? You're going to spend $75 million on implementation. Looking at 2017, you're going to provide $2.6 million. It means over the next 13 years, you're going to pick up another $72 million. So that's $5-6 million a year. Where is that? That's got to go into the operations every year, right?
So through the chair, if we just look at 2017 for the sake of simplicity here, the whole program, the implementation plan, adds up to $5.3 million in 2017. And what we've identified for 2017 is transferring $2.5 million to fund that, which does leave a shortfall of just under $3 million, 2.8. And that 2.8 million will be made up from existing balances and closing out other capital projects for 2017.
Okay. But then after that, you've got to start putting in $5 million and $4 million and $5 million. So that's got to come in here.
That is correct.
And you're saying that's not going to have any impact over and above the 9.2% increase already?
That is correct.
I find it hard to see where it's going to come from. Now, in addition to the implementation, you have $1.3 million for corporate initiatives. Are there going to be corporate initiatives all the way down the line for the next 15 years?
Through the chair, I can't say for certain what other corporate initiatives may come down the line, but it is, I can say with a relatively high degree of certainty for the next 5 or 6 years, it will be around that number.
So why can't we see a 5 or 10 year projection here of your operating statement to see where we're going and where's the money going to come from? The 9.2 just goes to meet the $6 million for the ARP.
Through the chair.
No, half of that.
Through the chair, that is in your operating budget package.
Okay. I haven't seen that yet. That's fine. There's a number of questions to me that aren't answered, and I'm not blaming anybody. It's a pretty complex issue, and I don't totally understand them.
Mayor Vervanovic.
Thank you. Just one quick question in terms of looking at all of the financial forecasting. Where in all of this have we factored in whatever might be coming out of the environmental infrastructure money coming from the feds? I mean, we got some money this year, and there'll be additional dollars coming for the next 10 or 11 years as well.
Through the chair, as previously mentioned, we've deferred $30 million worth of work. So if additional funding sources are available to us, we have work identified that we can pull into earlier years to get completed.
That needs to get done. Okay, thank you.
Okay. No further questions? So, do we have a mover? Moved by Councillor Fernandez. So, all in favor? Recorded vote. Okay, recorded vote has been called. All those in favor? Opposed? And that carries. Item 7, about the sidewalk infill reconstruction projects. We did receive an email from staff circulated about them requesting this item be withdrawn, and they anticipate bringing it forward to consideration on December 5th. So with that, the meeting of Community and Infrastructure Services Committee concludes, and we have to go back into caucus now. So, thank you.